Good morning. I'd like to call to order the September 16th, 2020 meeting of the UC Board of Regents. I want to welcome everyone for attending our fourth Regents meeting via Zoom. In accordance with Governor's executive orders, we are able to allow board members and presenters for items to participate remotely via video conferencing. Today and tomorrow are again full agendas. Hopefully our presenters will adhere to the time allocated for presentations so that the balance of our time can be used for meaningful discussions and also stay on track to end our meeting at a reasonable hour each day. Most of the committees will meet sequentially with one video stream, and all Regents may participate in committee meetings. We will also do several committee open sessions first today, followed by a couple of closed sessions. Later this afternoon, we will reconvene an open session for the Governance Committee and then the concurrent meetings of the committees on Academic and Student Affairs and on Finance and Capital Strategies. Both sessions will be live streamed on the internet. A reminder to the Regents and other participants to mute your sound when not actively engaging in the discussion. Also, because this is a teleconference meeting, every vote will be a roll call vote. I'm going to begin by asking the Secretary to call the roll of members of the board to establish a quorum. Madam Secretary.
Thank you. Regents Anguiano, Blum, Butler, Cohen, Drake.
Here.
Elliott.
Here.
Estolano.
Here.
Guber. Kiefer.
Here.
Kounalakis. Lansing.
Here.
Lieb.
Here.
Makarishian.
Here.
Mart.
Here.
Muakil.
Here.
Newsom. Ortiz Oakley.
Here.
Park.
Here.
Perez.
Here.
Riley.
Here.
Rendon. Sherman.
Here.
Stigura.
Here.
Suarez.
Here.
Thurman. Zettel.
Here.
You have a quorum.
Thank you. You want to just call the absent members one more time just to see if...
Sure. And as they join, I will mark them as present also. But one more time, Anguiano, Blum, Butler, Cohen, Guber, Kounalakis, Newsom, Rendon, Thurman.
Great. As you've established, we do have a quorum. We will mark the absent members present once they do arrive. With that, I would now like to move on to public comments. To our guests today, welcome and thank you for your interest in the University of California and for taking time to join us. The Regents appreciate your observations and comments. It's important for us to hear from the public on issues of concern to the University of California. As the notice on the Regents website indicates, because of health and safety considerations with regard to public meetings currently confronting state agencies, public comments will be held by telephone. The Secretary will be calling individuals when it's their turn to speak. Please be patient as we do our best to hear from as many of you, both in person and by telephone. The Secretary will now review the procedures and ground rules and recognize each speaker in turn. Madam Secretary.
Thank you. This morning we have many individuals who signed up to address the Regents on a variety of topics. So we will not necessarily be calling folks in the order in which they signed up. We will try and hear from a variety of topics. Each individual speaker will have up to a minute to address the Regents. What I'm going to do is call 5 names at a time so you can be near your phone. Once your name has been called, you will receive a call from us, and then you may proceed. I have a little timer. I won't give you a warning, but when your minute has expired, my timer will go off. So we'd appreciate it if you would wrap up your comments at that point so we can hear from as many speakers as we can. So
I just add one thing, Madam Secretary.
Sure.
And folks, if you're streaming, once you know that your name has been called and the phone call comes in, please mute whatever you're streaming, because if you're paying attention to the stream, the delay may confuse you about when you're recognized. So please follow the instructions on your phone once you know you've been called.
Great. Okay, so this morning we will hear from Miriam Goldman, Matt Ryan, Aaliyah Reynolds, Abby Reuter, Josh Chatton Brown.
Miriam, please proceed with your comment.
Hello, my name is Miriam Goldman. I am a student at UCSF, and I am just calling because I am extremely disappointed in the UC Regents for not continuing to talk about the really important topic that is abolition of the UCPD. We need to continue to talk about this. It's a really important topic. We have students and people in the hospitals at UCSF who are hurt by the UCPD, and we need UC abolition. We need to reimagine policing, and we need to do it now while we have the COVID pandemic happening. There is a coalition that has called for the end of the UCPD in 1 year, and we really need you guys to listen to us. Thank you very much.
Matt, please proceed with your comment.
Hello, my name is Matt Ryan. I'm a fourth-year MD PhD student at UCSF. Just for context, I'm the president of the Graduate and Postdoc Queer Alliance and a member of the Vice Chancellor's LGBTQ committee at UCSF, and I'm queer and non-binary. And I also represent a coalition of UC student leaders across all of the campuses of medical centers who represent reproductive justice and LGBTQ plus student groups. I'm here to talk about the Working Group on Comprehensive Access and the chair's report that was published earlier this year. It was convened over a year ago in August of 2019, and I'm concerned about the lack of transparency around a reasonable timeline to make this issue a priority. A public comment period ran through February of 2020, and these public comments have not been publicized or quantified in terms of support for option one, which outlines allowing affiliations that restrict care for women and LGBTQ patients. This issue was going to be discussed in May of this year and then was postponed due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Again, it was supposed to be discussed in July and then postponed. So where are we now? We have been told recommendations are expected late this year, and as the COVID-19 pandemic makes clear, hospitals should exist to provide access to the best possible care.
Aaliyah, please proceed with your comment.
Hello, my name is Aaliyah Sky. I'm the current EVP of AS-UCSB and the UA chair at UCSA. I would first like to urge the board to strongly take into consideration the basic needs of UC students, especially with concern to layoffs of student workers and financial aid cuts. Across the UC, there have been layoffs of about 1,200 workers, including student workers and especially workers in the periphery, as well as financial aid cuts to students' expected aid. This has left many students food insecure and facing homelessness during the midst of the pandemic, which is absolutely unacceptable. Second, I would like to propose a solution that, for lack of better words, kills two birds with one stone, prefacing this with a trigger warning mentions of sexual assault. UCPD has consistently shown a lack of moral and ethical standards while boasting a massive budget. Not only have they intimidated, harassed, and sometimes abused marginalized students, they have been implicated in numerous lawsuits concerning sexual assault. Just this week, the actions of Interim Chief Brock of UCSB-UCPD were publicized, finally allowing UCSB students to see that another student and staff worker had filed a Title IX complaint against him for sexual assault. This survivor was told not to mention the assault to anyone to, quote, protect Brock's privacy as a police officer, end quote. The Title IX investigation took a total of 255 days instead of the normal 60 to 90-day timeline, and they ended up giving no sanctions. During these 255 days, the survivor was unable to work either of their campus jobs because of fear of seeing Chief Brock, who would often patrol the campus where the survivor worked. This is a failure not only at the UCSB institutional level, but also at the system-wide UC and Board of Regents level. I strongly encourage you all to support defunding UCPD due to their egregious actions and putting a portion of the money saved from this towards basic needs of students during this pandemic.
Thank you.
Abby, please proceed with your comment.
Oh, before Abby proceeds, could I just read the next 5 names? Next, we'll hear from Becca Paskowitz, Nancy Groves, Aaliyah Korobkin, Wandra Lee Lindsay, and Kenneth Conklin. Sorry, Abby, go ahead.
And Mike, if we can turn up the volume a tiny bit on the public speakers, because they seem to be a little quieter than we are, and I want to make sure we hear them well.
Will do, Chair Perez. Thank you. Abby, please proceed with your comment.
Hello, my name is Abby Reuter. I am a student advocate for the Regents for this meeting and the Associate Vice President of Local Affairs at UC San Diego. I am here to speak strongly in support of the proposed Theater District Living and Learning Neighborhood project at UC San Diego, which is coming before the Finance and Capital Strategies Committee later today. As COVID-19 has proven, on-campus communities of the UC system are essential. The Theater District Living and Learning Neighborhood Project increases the supply of on-campus housing for students, allowing more students to have access to the on-campus opportunities, resources, and community of UC San Diego. For me personally, living on campus is a life-changing experience, and I want all students to have the opportunity to experience the same. It also means more stable housing, which is extremely important to student success, and in addressing the 5% of UC San Diego students, around 1,791 students, who are considered housing insecure. I urge the members of the Finance and Capital Strategies Committee to support the Theater District Living and Learning Neighborhood. Thank you for the opportunity to speak.
Becca, please proceed with your comment.
Good morning, all. My name is Becca Paskowitz, and I am a UCSD student. I would like to call on, in behalf of my support of the Theater District Living and Learning neighborhood, on behalf of the executive offices of ASUCSD, as well as other UCSD students. With the COVID-19 pandemic, on-campus housing has not only become more expensive, but has also become more scarce due to social distancing. This project would add approximately 2,000 beds, thus enabling the university to provide more housing guarantees for students that are returning to campus, whether due to force or choice in the fall. Especially in an area like San Diego, on-campus housing is advantageous due to steep rates for off-campus housing in San Diego, the steadily increasing price and scarcity of on-campus parking, and the greater flexibility which it offers for students. Our commuter students would also be better supported through the 1,200 parking spaces created through this initiative, as currently many of them are forced home after spending an hour to find open parking that they paid for. Furthermore, the project would provide open spaces which could serve as additional areas for seating and studying in between and after classes. This project would also provide additional educational, employment, and dining options through the provision of new academic spaces and the new market hall. With students always... Okay, thank you so much for my time.
Thank you.
I hope you consider the Theater District LLN.
Nancy, please proceed with your comment.
Yes, my name is Nancy Groves. I'm speaking in support of UC San Diego Theater District Living and Learning Neighborhood Project. I'm serving my third term on the University Community Planning Group as an elected member of the group representing District 1, and also serve as representative of the UC San Diego Community Advisory Group. With increasing enrollment, increasing population density, and a new city transit system under construction, a living and learning neighborhood such as the proposed Theater District project is needed to accommodate the still growing student body. Underground parking is also a smart way to maximize use of land, a direction in which the campus had gone in more than a decade ago. The design blends in with the surrounding character of the campus and provides the much-needed housing that the community is struggling to add. I particularly appreciate the openness of the plan and attention paid to preserving open space. I'd also like to thank the UC San Diego Planning Department for their attention to the many details raised by the community, keeping the community informed and the innovative solutions to many of the problems discussed. Thank you.
Al, please proceed with your comment.
Respected Regents, my name is Al Korobkin, and I speak in support of the Theater District Living and Learning Neighborhood Agenda item F2 on the September 16th agenda of the Finance and Capital Strategies Committee. I live in a senior living community in the La Jolla area, close to the UCSD campus. I commend the campus for its outreach and engagement efforts and its sensitivity to design that minimizes the bulk and scale of the project. The construction of housing in the San Diego community, particularly in the La Jolla area, is in great deficit. Though there are some in my community who do not acknowledge the need to develop this site, I support the project rationale and request the Regents to approve this project that furthers the mission of the University of California and improves the higher education experience for UC San Diego students and the surrounding community. Thank you for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you. Before we hear from our next speaker, let me just call the next five. Christina Hildebrand, Janie Emerson, Jane Perry, Risa Concalves, and Anthony Ayala.
Wandra Lee, please proceed with your comment.
Good morning, Regents. This is Wandra Lee Lindsay, an executive assistant at UCSF and one of the many committed leaders on the organizing committee of the UC Administrative Professionals Network. Upon reflection after hearing you and UC leadership speak compassionately and quite often of knowing how layoffs and furloughs will cause considerable pain to staff, especially the most vulnerable, I can offer you a way to exercise a compassion that is in harmony with your fiscal responsibility to the university. The way to transform your compassionate words, thoughts, and feelings into something tangible is to take compassionate action. That action requires you to search your hearts and UC financial statements and then ask yourselves, why on earth are we considering layoffs and furloughs? In your heart of hearts, in the quiet center of your being where only you can go, you, in truth, know the answer.
Kenneth, please proceed with your comment.
Aloha kako. I am Kenneth Conklin, PhD, a retired professor of philosophy. I have lived in Kaneohe, Hawaii for 28 years and have studied Hawaiian history and the ancient religion in depth and speak Hawaiian with moderate fluency. Some ethnic Hawaiians oppose the 30-meter telescope project because they claim Mauna Kea is a sacred place and TMT would be a desecration of it. There are 3 reasons why that claim should be rejected. Number 1, most ethnic Hawaiians today are Christians. The real disrespect of ancestors and desecration of the ancient religion comes at the hands of ethnic Hawaiians who today abuse it as a mere pawn in their political chess game. The 4 primary Native Hawaiian leaders exercising self-determination on behalf of their people officially abolished their old religion in 1819 when Kamehameha died, the year before the Christian missionaries arrived. Number 2, according to the most widely recognized creation legend from the old religion, the goddess who gave birth...
You may, if you don't finish your statement, you're welcome to submit the entire thing to our office in writing.
Christina, please proceed with your comment.
Hi, my name is Christina Hildebrand. I'm calling on behalf of A Voice for Choice Advocacy and on behalf of thousands of UC staff, faculty, students, and California taxpayers who are very much against the flu vaccine executive order that was signed by Janet Napolitano on her way out. I sent a long letter describing our stance on it, but we ask you to take the precautionary principle, which basically says that you should err on the side of caution rather than on the side of risk. The flu vaccine has not, and COVID have not been studied fully. There are some research papers that have come out saying that those who get the flu vaccine are at higher risk for coronaviruses, not necessarily COVID, but coronaviruses. We also would ask that the students are treated equally to the faculty and staff who have religious accommodations, especially given that students will be mostly off campus this year and not mingling with other students. And so we ask that you rescind the flu vaccine executive order, or at the very least, give students a religious exemption as you have done the faculty and staff. Thank you.
Janie, please proceed with your comment.
Good morning. This is Janie Emerson. I'm president of the La Jolla Shores Association and a proud lifetime alum of UC Santa Barbara. We are opposed to the Theater District Living Learning Neighborhood. We are for dorms and support of students. This complex is 900,000 square feet and includes a 21-story tower, and as revealed in the newspaper yesterday, ballrooms, conference centers, shopping centers, etc. I don't think most of you who, if you lived in a lovely beach community of about 40,000 people, would want a mega shopping center like this put right on top of you. The land was gifted for educating students and has deed restrictions on it that UC San Diego is now trying to remove. We hope that the Regents will have the courage to see through this. At no point has this entire project been disclosed to the community. At no time has the community been allowed to give complete input on a complete project. We ask that you delay or deny this project and avoid another community lawsuit. Thank you.
Thank you. Let me just read 5 more names before we hear from our next speaker. Griffin Dempsey, Jason Rabinowitz, Catherine Cobb, Cassie King, and Tony Krisafi.
Jane, please proceed with your comment.
Hope you are all safe, healthy, and have everything that you need. I'm a retired researcher and teacher with UC Berkeley. I'm addressing UC's investment in the TMT, and I commend the UC Regents in their bold stances taken toward advancing racial justice. However, in the case of the TMT, it's undeniable that Native Hawaiians oppose further trespass on their religious shrine and their sanctuary, Mauna Kea, which they have, as part of their identity, pledged to protect. Honoring diversity, equity, and inclusion in your investments means that the BOR stays in respectful relationship with Native Hawaiians. Without their free, prior, and informed consent, the TMT is a human rights violation according to the United Nations. The sprawling telescopes that have taken over the summit do not belong in a sacred and fragile ecological site that includes an aquifer. Industrialization in the summit deeply saddens me and is not in keeping with UC's sustainable investing. The TMT is a bad financial investment that will never see completion without violence against Indigenous people. Withdraw all support for TMT on Mauna Kea. Thank you.
Jason, please proceed with your comment.
Okay, good morning. This is Jason Rabinowitz. I'm Secretary Treasurer of Teamsters Local 2010, 12,000 University of California employees in clerical, administrative, and skilled trade classifications. Thanks, Regents, for having me today, and we want to welcome President Drake. You're joining us at a challenging time, but we look forward to working with you in the interests of the university community and working people at UC. We just want to speak out during this crisis that we're dealing with, that working people should not bear the brunt of the crisis in the form of layoffs, reductions in time. Our members and the about 200,000 working people at UC have built the university into a financial powerhouse and a great institution through our hard work. And now it's time for the university to take care of working people, protect our jobs, our income, and to continue to create good jobs in our community. If we can do that by enforcing contracted work, using our reserves, reducing it, executive bloat, then I'll wrap up. Then we will help to speed the recovery in California from this crisis. But if we lay people off and harm working people, then it's also going to harm our communities and delay the crisis, the recovery from the crisis in California. So we urge President Drake and the Regents to take every effort to work with the unions to preserve jobs, protect working people. Thank you.
Griffin, please proceed with your comment.
Hello, my name is Griffin Dempsey. I'm an undergraduate student at UC San Diego studying urban studies and planning, and I'd like to speak out in support of the Theater District Living and Learning neighborhood. The reality of UC San Diego is its growth is outpacing the region's capacity to handle it, and many students are forced to commute long distances or live in overpriced off-campus housing to be able to attend UC San Diego. The Theater District Living and Learning neighborhood would go to solve a lot of these problems by adding 2,000 student beds to campus, creating a more contiguous campus community, and providing important housing that students badly need. I encourage the Regents to adopt this project despite some of the concerns of the community, who seem to be overly concerned with growth happening in their backyard, even though the UC is not necessarily in the community of La Jolla Shores, which I would perhaps describe as an overserved community, while as many UC San Diego students struggle to find housing. So please keep our
our needs first in mind. Thank you.
Catherine, please proceed with your comment. Catherine, are you there?
Can we
Cassie?
try her again?
Yes, we'll try her again. Cassie, can you please proceed with your comment?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you. I'm a recent graduate of UC Berkeley and very involved in the community with many close friends still on campus. And I think you might have seen a recent investigation by some of them who actually went to Seaboard Foods, a UC Berkeley supplier, found extreme animal cruelty and also staph infections and diseases that they tested for and confirmed inside the facility. And I'm really grateful that UC Berkeley's dropped that supplier in response. But I'm calling to ask for your support in taking that even farther and removing meat from campus dining halls, because given the state that we're in with a massive pandemic and wildfires raging throughout the state and so many obvious repercussions from our interactions with animals and factory farming and the animal agriculture industry at large, I think that the pressure is really on institutions like UC Berkeley that are building future generations and future minds and future leaders to take a necessary stance against an industry so violent. So I'm urging you to please support banning all animal products in the long haul, but at least right now to remove meat from dining halls as a really strong stance we can take to prevent the next pandemic and look out for our students. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to read 5 more names. Samache Wasantwisut, Carlo Silberger, Leanne Martinez, Donna Rowling, and Sarah Mooney.
Catherine, please proceed with your comment.
Good morning, President Drake, and welcome. Chancellor Perez and Regents. I'm Catherine Cobb, President of Teamsters Local 2010, the union of 12,000 hardworking UC clerical and skilled trade workers across the state. The persistence of the coronavirus has stymied effects for the nation to return back to normal, and the UC is no different. Key decisions have to be made as we all endure these uncertain times. As we reopen our schools and universities, health and safety protocols are essential for UC students and employees, given the outbreaks that have been seen in college communities already across the country. There is critical need for UC to adhere to the state's safety guidelines, be transparent in releasing safety plans, and work collaboratively with stakeholders like our union instead of imposing top-down decisions. This is too important to mess up now more than ever. Thank you.
Somchat, please proceed with your comment.
Hi, my name is Somchet Wasantwisut. I am an international PhD candidate at UC Riverside. Due to the COVID pandemic, graduate students need to take more time to complete their program. However, international students cannot extend their normative time without having to pay an IST. UC Berkeley and UC Davis have already implemented a blanket extension, while UC Riverside and UC San Diego only extend an IST waiver on a case-by-case basis. However, UCLA and UC Santa Cruz have yet to implement such policies. Therefore, I urge the region to consider implementing a statewide policy, giving every international graduate student at the UC a blanket one-year waiver to an IST, so that the financial burden will not fall on those who cannot and do not deserve it. Thank you very much.
Carlo, please proceed with your comment.
Good morning. My name is Carlos Silberger. I work for the Partnership for Los Angeles Schools. The worst thing for my colleagues and I in the K-12 system is uncertainty. We can't provide students and families with accurate information if we are hearing divergent messages from different campuses or from different individuals at the Chancellor's office. 2 weeks ago, we saw information about the preliminary injunction from the Superior Court suspending the use of admissions tests for the next 4 years. We, of course, changed our strategy at that point to go along with that decision. However, the recent UC Counselor conferences, we once again received unclear and inconsistent messaging that is making our jobs very difficult. During the same 3-day conference intended to help counselors and their students effectively apply for admission at this university system, we were told that some campuses were unsure as to how they would use the test scores. On a different day of the same conference, we were told that they were consulting legal counsel regarding the court ruling, and didn't want to comment on it anymore. When people were asked about use of the SAT subject scores for competitive majors like engineering and nursing, we were told to check each individual program's website. Please provide clarity as soon as possible. Thank you.
Thank you. We may have a few people already on the line, but I have time to call two more names. And so if we can get them queued up, Miguel Avila and Melissa Camacho.
Leanne, please proceed with your comment.
Hi, my name is Leanne Martinez. I am a senior custodian at UC Riverside. I've been working for the UC for 28 years until UC decided to lay me off 2 months ago. I am not alone. Almost 80 of my coworkers at the Extension Center, dining, and parking has gotten layoff notices from UCR since July. To be clear, most of us were already at the bottom struggling. Since I was laid off, I have not received a single check from EDD. It's extremely stressful not knowing which bill to pay first. Right now, my son is under my health care plan. If I lose my job permanently, I will lose health care coverage for both me and my son. It's wrong for UC to lay off workers during the pandemic. As the third largest employer, UC should be lifting people up one by one when we have been there for UC. Instead, UC is kicking people when they are down. UC can do better. Bring us back. Stop the layoffs.
Sarah, please proceed with your comment.
Good morning. My name is Sarah Mooney, and I'm the Regional Affairs Director at the Campaign for College Opportunity. I have the privilege of working with a number of college access organizations across the state who support high school students along their path to a degree. Many of these partners attended the recent UC Counselors Conference. All of the partners who I have spoken with have shared that they left the event feeling utterly confused at the lack of clarity from the system. These adults work with thousands of Black, Latinx, Indigenous, first-gen, and low-income students who are anxiously awaiting answers for how the system will plan to use tests. As one partner put it, in the current environment of a global pandemic, growing economic depression, and deepened equity divide, it is detrimental and prejudicial to underrepresented students in any way to take the SAT or ACT into account. As regents, you all proudly took a unanimous decision so that admissions would not disproportionately impact those students. Do not let a lack of communication, inconsistency, and wavering commitments get in the way of your intentions. Students and their support systems are stuck in a state of limbo right now. We urge the UC to quickly communicate their actual policies on testing to students and families. Thank you.
Miguel, please proceed with your comment.
Good morning. My name is Miguel Avila Morales, and I'm here to represent the Undocumented Student Coalition and Undocumented Student Legal Services. I would like to mention that during the pandemic, undocumented families have been strategically excluded from the COVID-19 grant at the federal level, a type of aid that would have lessened food and shelter insecurities, and they would also experience constant threats on their livelihood by immigration enforcement and judicial rulings. Therefore, I would like to mention that the only type of aid that undocumented students have been relying on is on the aid that is provided by the campuses. However, we would like to know the type of funding that they will continue to, that the Undocumented Student Center will continue to get, since the center has been increasing rapidly in regards to the type of in types 2, like the DACA renewal cases and asylum cases. Nevertheless, we just want to have a greater understanding of where the UC system is willing to support the undocumented service centers and undocumented students overall. Thank you very much.
Melissa, please proceed with your comment.
Hi, Melissa Johnson Camacho. I'm a registered nurse and I work at UC Davis Medical Center. I just want to let the Board of Regents know that nurses still have not forgotten what happened in March, and we're still fighting to have access to PPE. We're being told to follow the science when clearly UCOP numbers are showing nurses are at a higher rate of getting these infections, COVID infections, and we're still being told to follow the science. And the science clearly points to the fact that nurses should be able to use whatever PPE they want in their judgment, and that includes N95s, even if the CDC guidelines don't support that. Nurses have been fighting for masks this whole time, including in the beginning when we were being told that we would be disciplined for wearing masks. We had not forgotten that. And so I just want to say that nurses should be able to use whatever PPE they need to in their judgment. And we are going to keep fighting until that happens. Thank you.
Thank you. Those are all the speakers that we had queued up so far.
Thanks. That concludes our public comment for today. Obviously, at the beginning of tomorrow's meeting, we will also be open for public comment. I want to thank the speakers who shared their ideas and their comments with us this morning, and the Regents will take them into account even though we don't respond to them in real time. With that, I'd like to move on to my opening comments for the day. Again, thank you all for taking part in today's meeting, and our sincere thanks to those who shared their public comments. I've said in a couple of settings this week that the onset of fall presents an archetypical image of college life. And it, in fact, intensifies the feeling of how not normal this fall is and all that we are dealing with. But I also hope it strengthens our resolve to ensure that this university, the students, the faculty, and the staff and the communities we serve come out even stronger on the other side of this pandemic. I'm tremendously pleased this morning to welcome our newest regent, the 21st president of the University of California, Dr. Michael Drake. In the 2 months since he's been appointed, I've had several opportunities to join alongside Dr. Drake in a variety of campus and community settings throughout the UC system. And I'll repeat briefly here what I've said in those settings. I couldn't be happier with the presidential selection process or the result. President Drake's experience, his history with the university, and his commitment to serving all students all offers an exciting opportunity for leadership going forward. And President Drake, we're receiving excellent feedback about your ongoing engagements with the community and about the challenges we're facing as a university. To make Dr. Drake feel at home, I want to share a special welcome document that I prepared for him. Now, it's a good thing that you're an ophthalmologist, because if your specialty was in other areas, the demonstration may have been much more complicated to do in this session. I also want to welcome to the board table our new faculty representative, Dr. Robert Horowitz, who is Vice Chair of the Academic Council and Professor of Communications at UC San Diego. His research centers on democracy and political reform, which is such a critical area of focus given the existential crisis we face as a society. In the interest of time, I will note only a few items of particular interest on this agenda. Later this morning, Executive Vice President Byington will provide the board with an update on the impacts of COVID-19 and on the strategic plans being developed by UC Health. This afternoon, the Academic and Student Affairs Committee will be briefed on fall academic plans that have been informed by the experience of remote instruction in the spring. Tomorrow, the full board will hear and discuss a presentation on actions the university took in 2009 in response to the dire financial situation that faced us during the Great Recession. That presentation and the discussion will help inform the situation we find ourselves in now with the pandemic and its resulting financial impacts. There is a necessity for UC to consider an array of options, including possible workforce actions. However, this is a discussion item, not an action item. Now, I want to be clear. We received a temporary reprieve in our state budget this year with cuts delayed pending badly needed federal action on the next COVID-19 stimulus package. While one hopes that reason or even just political self-interest will ultimately kick in Washington, we would be remiss if not planning for bad news. And we also are reminded that unlike the Great Recession, the impacts on UC's budget this year are greater than the impacts of public funding alone. In fact, each of the revenue streams for the university has taken a severe hit because of the COVID-19 pandemic. As we move forward in these discussions, we want to hear advice and ideas from campuses and all UC segments on how best to manage these challenges. One thing I learned during my time as speaker during the Great Recession is the importance of working to avoid the kinds of short-sighted cuts and job actions that actually cause long-term harm. I want to be clear that a high priority for the university, and I know I'm speaking not only for myself, but for many people around the board table and President Drake, when I say one of our highest priorities remains protecting our most vulnerable employees, particularly in these challenging times. And again, the item tomorrow is just the discussion. No board action is contemplated for this meeting. So, while we want to do everything we can to avoid disproportionate hits for our employees and for our most vulnerable employees in particular, we have an obligation to look at all of the challenges and make the most responsible decisions for the entirety of the mission of the university and in the interests of our communities and our employees. The board will also hear a presentation on Prop 209 and the impact it's had on diversity at the university. Finally, you'll recall that our last meeting, we had a vigorous discussion on campus safety and policing issues. Since then, I've continued to work on these important issues with Dr. Drake and others, and we will be bringing forward potential approaches in the coming weeks as soon as is practical. Again, thank you for being part of today's meeting, and it is now my pleasure to turn the microphone over to our newest regent, President Michael Drake. President Drake.
Well, thank you, Chair Perez. And it's great to be back at the University of California and to meet with all of you, although I do wish that we were able to meet in person. I will say, Chair Perez, you mentioned the rites of passage and rituals of fall, and welcoming students to campus has been one of my most anticipated and enjoyed activities these last several years, and I miss it very much, and I look forward very much to us getting back to normal order. I've attended more than 100 Regents meetings over the past years, although this is my first in this new role, and I will say that I'm both excited and humbled to be here. Brenda and I returned to UC because of the high quality of the people, the students, the faculty, and staff, and because of the impact this institution has on individuals, on the state of California, the nation, and the world. This is an inspiring place to study, to work, and to conduct research. Everywhere we have a campus, a medical center, a research facility, an extension program, we strive to uplift and make the community stronger in myriad ways, through art and science, through agriculture and engineering, through clinical care and research, and so much more. All this was true when I first came to the university as a student years ago, and it is still true today, as our society confronts an ever-increasing number of crises. I'm grateful to be able to collaborate with such committed and talented people. No institution is perfect, of course, and even the best ones can and must improve. With the support of my fellow board members and our larger community, I look forward to the work at hand. I've spent these first few weeks meeting with people across the university, catching up with past colleagues and meeting new ones, getting briefed on the many issues we face and the different facets of our work. Among many significant disruptions, the pandemic has curtailed our ability to interact with one another in person. I've always valued the opportunity to engage closely with the community, and while I am somewhat limited in how I do so now, I intend to continue outreach in creative and safe ways. These interactions are very important to me. Since the board last met in July, the university has continued to grapple with the impacts of COVID-19, the wildfires that have ravaged California, and the effects of systemic racism on our commitments, on our communities, among many other challenges. In particular, we are managing the budget impacts of the pandemic and the challenges it poses for the university's core operations. The board will discuss this issue in greater detail tomorrow. Underlying this effort is our strong desire to protect our most vulnerable employees as we preserve and even strengthen our education and research excellence. All of these issues present difficulties, but also opportunities to rise up and meet this unique moment. I'll share just a few highlights. Many of our campuses were ready to support their communities when wildfires erupted across the state, even as some of our campuses were themselves threatened and forced to evacuate. The UC Davis Fire Department contributed hundreds of person hours to firefighting efforts locally and in Southern California. UC Davis Medical Center also treated injured patients, and the School of Veterinary Medicine sheltered and cared for animals and provided search and rescue services in the Vacaville Hills. Many of our campuses and medical centers are involved in critical COVID-19 research that is helping us both prevent and treat infections. For example, UCSF and UC San Diego will pilot the use of a smartphone technology to notify users if they have had high-risk COVID-19 exposure that may result in infection. The effort uses Google Apple exposure notification technology on smartphones to supplement the work of human contact tracers. Privacy and security are central to this technology, which does not collect location data from any device and never shares user identities. And new research at UC Santa Barbara is looking at the disparate impacts of COVID-19 on essential workers, such as grocery store and postal employees. Our campus leaders continue to engage with their communities on the issues of anti-racism, community policing, and public safety. These issues have come into renewed and intense focus this summer, and as recently as just these past few days. Important conversations are happening across the University of California system, including at the Office of the President, and I am encouraged to be a part of some of these long overdue dialogues. As Chair Pettis said, the two of us have discussed this issue at length and are working on a framework for addressing campus safety and community policing. I will collaborate closely with the chancellors on this, as I believe that these conversations must begin at the campus level and be informed by the needs and experiences of those at each UC location. Despite these hardships, our campuses continue to shine in a number of important areas. In its annual college guide and rankings, Washington Monthly Magazine rated all 9 UC's undergraduate campuses in the top 100 among public institutions, with 5 campuses in the top 10. These rankings measure universities based on their contributions to social mobility, research, and public service. U.S. News and World Report released their rankings earlier this week. All 9 undergraduate UC campuses were ranked in the top 100 overall. Applause to the newest member of that group. And in addition, all undergraduate campuses placed in the top 40 among public institutions, with UCLA and UC Berkeley ranked numbers 1 and 2 respectively. And all undergraduate campuses ranked in the top 80 for social mobility, including 4 in the top 5. Those included Riverside, Irvine, Santa Cruz, and Merced. And UC admitted its most ethnically diverse class of California students for fall 2020. Overall, underrepresented groups comprise 41% of admitted California students. I may say about that having been at an institution in the Midwest, the numbers I just read are what institutions across the country dream of and aspire to. You hear it all the time. We hear it all the time. We're used to having campuses ranked at the top of these lists. But I want to make sure that you know that in the rest of the world, we're specifically focused on and admired, and we are the universities that other people wish to emulate. So I remember looking at this from the other side for a while, and I will say that the achievements that we have, that I've just shared over these, that we've achieved over these last many years are things that others really do aspire to. And I'm proud to be joining you again in this role. Amidst all of this, 2 of our campuses, Merced and Berkeley, have actually begun the academic year. The rest of our campuses are not far behind. And I want to thank our chancellors, faculty, and staff who have worked so hard to prepare for this unprecedented academic year. And I want to recognize our students who have continued to persevere and who are following strict protocols to keep themselves and others healthy. Thank you. It is my hope that what we tackle in these board meetings will continue to support, shape, and propel these efforts across the university. And I look forward to having many productive conversations with my fellow board members. I know several of you from my earlier years with UC, and I'm grateful that we get to work together once more. With that, it's time to get on with the meeting. Mr. Chair, that concludes my remarks.
Thank you, President Drake. I'd now like to ask Faculty Representative Govain, the new chair of the Academic Senate, to present her remarks. Faculty Representative Govain.
Thank you, Chair Perez, and good morning, everyone. I'm happy to be joining you today as Chair of the Academic Senate and a faculty representative to the Board of Regents. The other faculty representative is the Vice Chair of the Academic Senate, Professor Robert Horowitz, who I'm pleased to introduce to you. Dr. Horowitz is a sociologist in the Department of Communication at UC San Diego, where he has been on the faculty since 1982. He is a respected scholar in the study of democracy and political reform. He has studied regulatory reform in a large organization undergoing deregulation. He was invited by the African National Congress to study the post-apartheid reform process in South Africa. His recent research focuses on the rise of conservatism over the last half century in the United States. Dr. Horowitz has longstanding engagement with the Academic Senate on his campus and system-wide, and he has served in an administrative capacity as department chair on several occasions. I'm sure that you join with me in welcoming Dr. Horowitz. We look forward to working with you over the coming year, and we extend a warm welcome to President Drake. We also look forward to working with you. This is the beginning of another academic year, a time that is usually filled with excitement on the campuses and much positive energy. But sadly, this is not the case this year. These are not usual times. On March 11th, a little more than 6 months ago, the first stay-at-home orders were issued in the San Francisco Bay Area and in many counties throughout the state. Most of us, save some epidemiologists, were shocked when it happened. We had not encountered such a situation in our lifetime, and there was, at first, much curiosity and activity as we tried to understand it all and figure out what to do. What we did to live and learn in the early days of the pandemic gave us direction and a sense of control, which helped us cope. But now, after these many months and no clear end in sight, a more chronic state of stress has set in, and our bodies and minds are not well equipped to deal with the ongoing anxiety, uncertainty, and worry it entails. Our resources and energy are drained, and the toll is evident among our faculty, students, and staff. In addition to genuine worry about their physical health, the ongoing personal, social, and economic difficulties they face are affecting their mental health and well-being. Many experts predict that mental health concerns will continue and even increase as time goes on. Some are referring to this process as the pandemic echo. We need to keep a close watch on it as we move through the fall term. Our faculty, students, and staff are to be commended for their actions in the spring when they shifted quickly and effectively to remote instruction. But now it is fall, and we really don't know what to expect because we didn't expect to be here. Although most courses will be taught remotely, as was done in spring, we must not underestimate how difficult the situation is on the ground. Technology is fantastic, except when it isn't. Problems in teaching, advising, and testing will undoubtedly occur. We just don't know the extent or severity yet. And at the same time, our faculty, students, and staff are trying to cope with their own lives, professional and personal. We will all hear more about this over the year, and I mention it now, not because you aren't aware of it. You too are worried about these issues, as well as moving yourself and your loved ones safely through these days of days. My point is that in our roles here, we must remember the great difficulty the pandemic presents to the people who work and learn at the University of California, people who have entrusted their livelihoods and future to us. The year will be difficult for the institution in two other major ways. We live in an unsettling time for individuals, society, and the planet itself. We must do all we can to identify and correct any practices that contribute to systemic racism at the university. One way to do this, which we plan to do in the Academic Senate, is to stop and think at every decision point about why we do something the way we do, and whether our actions contribute to or enable inequities to occur. If we think they do, then we need to do something about it. Doing this in one instance may seem inconsequential, but if we all do it and we do it consistently, it could lead to powerful and positive changes in the university. It is also a way of putting responsibility for addressing systemic racism in our own hands. In order to combat this societal injustice, we all need to be agents of change. A second difficulty before us is the climate crisis. In fact, many world leaders have said that the havoc wrought by the pandemic is simply a warm-up for the environmental devastation and social disruption that the climate crisis will bring if drastic changes do not occur soon. Of course, the climate crisis is not separate from the pandemic. Both stem from disregard for and abuse of the environment, behaviors that are hard to fathom. As the primatologist Jane Goodall recently said, and I quote, "Bizarre, isn't it, that the most intellectual creature, surely that's ever lived on the planet, is destroying its only home." I always believe it's because there's a disconnect between that clever brain and the human heart, love, and compassion. I truly believe only when head and heart work in harmony can we attain our true human potential. End of quote. The Academic Senate will be committing much of its effort this year to figuring out how to use the vast resources and expertise of the university to address the climate crisis, both on our campuses and beyond. Our work will be guided by the Green New Deal developed by faculty at UC San Diego, and it will be led by Vice Chair Horwitz, who has been involved with this effort on his campus. We will not be creating a task force to do this work because a task force focuses on a single defined task or activity. The climate crisis is not a singular issue. It is the condition of life today, one that threatens our very existence. As such, we need to think about it from every angle possible, including our teaching, research, campus environments, finances and budget, and importantly, environmental justice. Moreover, this crisis will not be solved by individuals working in a single or small set of disciplines. Scientists in the STEM fields are, of course, vital to this work, and UC has many researchers working on clean energy development, environmental conservation and replenishment, and the protection and preservation of natural resources. Social and health scientists will help us understand and track the social and demographic changes underway. They will also devise and deliver healthcare practices and closely monitor health trends. Behavioral scientists will help us understand human thought processes and actions that contribute to the crisis and identify corrective changes that are needed and how we might get there. Artists, writers, and humanists will guide us every step of the way as they put into words, images, and performances the current state of the planet, as well as where we might be in the future. We believe the University of California can and must play a leadership role in climate issues, and that this effort will enrich our community and inspire those outside the system who look to us for leadership. We expect that many of those who will be centrally involved in this effort will be young people, our undergraduates and graduate students, our postdocs, and our younger faculty. They will push us forward because they desperately want to live in a safer and cleaner world than the one they have inherited. In closing, I want you to know that I understand that the time I have to present remarks to the board is valuable and that I aim to use it well. My goal will be to inform you about issues the Senate is working on and to provide you with updates about our faculty, students, and staff. This year will be very, very tough, and none of us is starry-eyed about it. But I firmly believe we have two things that will help us going forward. First, we will work together. We'll have to. The problems we face are simply too large and the uncertainties too great for us not to use our collective experience and expertise. Second, and more importantly, we have hope. I can hear it in your voices, if not always in your words, and I see it on your faces, even though we meet only through computer screens. Alongside hope, we must also have empathy and compassion for each other, especially for those among us who are most in need at this time. Chair Perez, this concludes my remarks.
Thank you, Faculty Representative Govain. I appreciate the substance and the spirit of your remarks. Well, congratulations on your new role. With that, I would now like to move to agenda item B1, an update on COVID-19 impact on the University of California and UC Health. And I recognize Executive Vice President, Dr. Carrie Byington. Dr. Byington.
Thank you, Chair Perez. Thank you, President Drake. It's a privilege to be with you all today. If I could have the slides, please. And we can go to the next slide. Thank you very much. So this is where we are as we enter into the fall in the United States with the COVID-19 pandemic. The good news is the slope of the line is going down, both in the United States and in the state of California. And we are down approximately 35 to 40% from highs in August. The news that is less good is that we're not where we'd like to be as we enter into the fall. We still continue to have many thousands of cases each day in the United States, approaching 45 to 50,000, and many thousands of cases in California. And just on Sunday, the World Health Organization announced the highest day for cases of COVID across the world, with 3 countries leading that. Those countries were India, the United States, and Brazil. So we enter in on a downward slope, but with concerns that as the weather becomes colder and as we begin to gather more inside, we may see an upward trajectory through the fall and the winter. Next slide, please. This is a graphic that demonstrates state by state when they have seen the peak number of cases. And for us in California, the summer really was our hardest time. And July 16th was the day of the highest number of cases in our state. For me, as an infectious disease physician and one interested in epidemiology, I look at that peak and I expect at least 8 weeks to start to see a resolution and a turning down of that peak. And that's exactly where we are today, September 16th. And I expect that we still have weeks to go to continue to push that curve down, and that we must do that work in September and in October. Next slide, please. I share with you each time the hospitalizations. These slides were submitted in early September, so we continue to make further improvement from the numbers that you see here. If you recall, in July, we were at nearly 9,000 hospitalizations in the state of California. In early September, it was about 4,800, and today we're right about 3,500 in the state of California. And there are approximately 72,000 licensed hospital beds across the state of California. So we are doing well in bringing the hospitalization numbers down across our state and ensuring that we have sufficient bed capacity across our state to treat not only the COVID-19 patients, but also patients who require hospitalization for any other cause. Next slide, please. These are numbers from UC Health specifically. And again, these are from early September. Again, you can see a downward slope from our peak in July. And today, our number of cases at across UC Health is 142. That is the lowest number that we have had since June, and gives us some hope that we will continue to push down. We would like to see our cases across the system return to levels in the spring, which would be 100 or less. So we still have some work to do. Next slide, please. And I thought that I would spend some time showing you some new data that we've analyzed by age, and I'll spend just a moment explaining these curves. So we collect data across the UC Health system through our enterprise data warehouse, through the Center for Data-Driven Insights, and which is led by Dr. Atul Butte. And we have divided up our population in deciles, starting from 0 to 9 years and going all the way to 80 plus years. And they're color-coded throughout these graphs. When you look at the beginning of the pandemic in March and in April, the highest number of admissions that we were seeing were in the elderly population, those who were older than age 70 and even 80 plus. Come now to the end of August and the beginning of September, to the far right hand of the curve. And what you see is that the largest numbers of hospitalizations are occurring in the working age individuals between 50 and 69 years. And you see that here at the top end of the curve. And I would also draw your attention here. This gray curve is individuals who are 20 to 29 years old. And the black curve is those who are 80 and older. Today in UC Health, we have the same number of hospitalizations in those aged 20 to 29 as we do in those who are over 80 years old. It shows us the change that's happened across the pandemic. I hope that we are better in protecting our seniors, and that is the reason that we see their case numbers coming down. But we are seeing an increase in activity, work, social interactions in the younger age groups, and we are starting to see hospitalizations in that age group. Next slide, please. These are our testing trends and our positivity rates for the state of California. And we are seeing some declines in our testing, but still a substantial number of tests each day at about 100,000. And our positivity rate, gratefully, is declining and is currently about 4.4%. We've talked about positivity rate here a number of times. The World Health Organization would urge us to be under 5%, so it is encouraging to see 4.4%. And the state of California has defined 8% as or higher as significant risk for widespread transmission. Next slide, please. Our test positivity rate, and again, these are graphs from the University of California, also differ by age, and I think it's worth discussing as well. Early in the pandemic, we saw test positivity rates that approached 10% and were highest again in older age groups. Here, the highest positivity rate was in those who were aged 50 to 59 years, but also in the higher age groups, 60, 70, 80 plus. We saw extraordinarily low positivity rates in children and adolescents, young adults in these lines here. Come again to the far end of the graph to late August, early September, and we've seen significant increases in positivity rates in both children, 0 to 9 years of age, and adolescents, 10 to 19 years of age, who have rates of positivity of 6.8%. This is where our college freshmen can be found. Next slide, please. And the increase in positivity in children is something that we have seen not only in California, but across the United States. These are data from the American Academy of Pediatrics, who follow trends in childhood COVID-19 cases, hospitalizations, and death, really since children began to be impacted in May. So these are data from May to August, and you see in every category, children are having the highest rate of increases in cases detected, hospitalizations, and even in deaths. Overall, these numbers are small, but the proportional increases are quite large. Next slide, please. Regent Makarishan asked me about mortality the last time we were together. And so I have a number of slides that will let us look at COVID mortality. Nationwide, COVID-19 deaths are now the third leading cause of death in the United States, surpassing many important causes of death like flu and pneumonia, stroke, accidents, and are third only to cancer and heart disease in the United States. We continue to see nearly 1,000 deaths per day due to COVID-19 in the United States. And that is a statistic that we cannot become immune to, that we cannot accept as a new normal. Next slide, please. These graphs show the death rates for coronavirus in the United States by state. And I am pleased to report that California is down here. We are in the middle of the pack at 33 deaths per 100,000 people in our state, substantially better than New Jersey, New York, Massachusetts, and Connecticut. Why is that? I would say part of this reason that we have seen a lower mortality rate is that we have exceptional care, number one, in our state, led by excellent hospital facilities that have not been overwhelmed. We have not experienced being overwhelmed with a number of infections that we were not able to care for. I believe that's why the rates were so high on the East Coast in New Jersey, New York, Massachusetts, and Connecticut. And it is our goal every day in UC Health to ensure that our facilities are prepared and are not overwhelmed. It is one of the reasons we are so supportive of the influenza vaccine mandate for the University of California, and really for all the state as a way to continue to protect our hospital capacity and our hospital resources as we enter into fall and winter. Next slide, please. I also wanted us to look at mortality data at the University of California. There are two things that we can notice here. First, mortality appears to be highest in the oldest age group, which is this black line of 80 plus. That is not unexpected and is what has been seen across the United States. The good news of this slide is no matter what age group we're talking about, mortality rates are declining overall. We are becoming better at taking care of patients who have COVID-19. And I think we're becoming better at preventing those at high risk from becoming infected as we understand more about non-pharmaceutical interventions such as wearing masks and physical distancing. Next slide, please. This is another graphic representation just to look at 30-day mortality for inpatients that we've cared for across the University of California Health System. It is very difficult to get a case fatality rate or an infection fatality rate because we never know the denominator of all those who have been infected. What we can do is look at mortality for those we care for in the hospital, those who are our inpatients. So these are data from the beginning of the pandemic and include every COVID-19 inpatient that we've cared for across the University of California. And again, we've divided into deciles. Here, these first three, these are individuals from 0 to 29 years of age, and their average mortality is about 1.5%. Even in this youngest age group, if they are admitted to the hospital, their mortality within 30 days is 1.5% and is highest for the very youngest. And in this 0 to 9 age group, it is really infants younger than 1 who have the highest mortality. Next, we get to the working age individuals, 30 to 39, 40 to 49, and 50 to 59. And here, the average mortality is around 3% in this working individual group, age group. And then as we get into the older age groups, we see substantial increases in mortality across the 30-day inpatient measure. For those 60 to 69, it's 9.2%, 70 to 79, 11.1%, and for those 80 plus, overall, it's now 16.9%. These numbers, for me as a physician, are sobering. For me as a pediatrician, particularly so. Children are extremely resilient, and it is rare for me as a pediatrician to care for children with any condition that has a mortality rate that is between 1% and 3%. So these rates are substantial, and no matter what age we're looking. Next slide, please. And this, Regent Makarishan, was to answer your question about the percentage of all COVID deaths that occur in long-term care facilities. This is a map of the United States by state, and for California, 40% of our COVID fatalities can be tied back to individuals who are in long-term care facilities. That compares in a similar manner to the entire United States, where overall the proportion is about 42%. And you can see across the states, some with some higher numbers and some with lower numbers. Again, I think for those that have the higher rates, they may have become overwhelmed with outbreaks that they were unable to bring under control. Next slide, please. So what are we projecting for California? These numbers need to, again, be updated. Currently, these numbers were current as of early September. Today, we're at about 14,000 deaths that have occurred in California. The model that I use and the actual deaths that have been reported in California are very, very closely related. And so the projected deaths on this model by November 1st are 18,067. We believe using this model as well that the United States will reach 200,000 deaths by next week, most likely, and that globally we will see 1 million deaths in a similar time frame. So mortality from COVID-19 is still something that we are concerned about, although we believe we're getting better at treating. We're also becoming more and more concerned about the long-term effects of those who recover from COVID-19 infection. Next slide, please. So what is California doing? And early in September, California released a new blueprint for a safer economy and a new way for us to track our COVID-19 metrics and to use those metrics to guide the reopening of our counties and the different business sectors. Next slide, please. There is now a 4-step risk level that is color-coded. Widespread is purple, substantial is red, moderate is orange, and minimal is yellow. There is no green here, and that was particularly done so that people did not feel like there was green and therefore no risk was involved anymore. So all of these do represent some risk, and there are 2 metrics that are particularly used to define the risk. And those are the number of new cases each day per 100,000 people and the percent positivity rate. So for widespread, we're looking at daily new case numbers greater than 7 and positive tests that are greater than 8%. And then it goes down from there. Obviously, our goal is to get into this minimal category. And it is this minimal to moderate category that many across the country have recommended for the opening and resumption of in-person classes, both for the K through 12 and college populations. Next slide, please. I will also mention you need to meet both metrics in order to move. One of the other things that I think that is very positive by this new mechanism is that it requires individual counties to stay in a category for at least 3 weeks to demonstrate that they have really gotten the metrics under control before they move forward, and that data is reviewed weekly on Tuesdays before announcements are made about counties moving. So the statewide metrics, again, from early September showed primarily widespread infection across the state, We have made some progress since that time, since early September, and we now have about a 4% positivity rate, as I told you, and about 7 cases per 100,000 on average across the state. Next slide. When we are in a widespread situation of purple category, we are closed for in-person instruction in the higher education sector. That's very important for us as we move into the fall. Next slide, please. So one of the things I've done is to map our University of California sites by the metrics. And so I've broken it up into the Sacramento metro area, which covers UC Davis, the San Francisco Bay Area, which covers UC Berkeley and UCSF, and then other regions across our state. And you can see for the majority of our campus communities and our medical centers, we remain in the widespread purple category. We have some that have entered into the red category, including the San Francisco Bay Area, San Diego, and just recently Orange County was moved into the red area as well. Next slide, please. So I always do like to focus on some of the good news that is coming from UC Health and from our campuses, and we'll get started. Next slide, please. First, we will look at our financial metrics just briefly. These are the lost revenue reports that we submit to the Department of Finance at the state each month, and this includes the new report for August. For UC Health, you see a total in lost revenue at $1.3 billion at this point. There is some good news that we see that the losses in June, July, and August are certainly less than the losses that we reported in April and in May. And we are certainly doing everything we can to recover our usual care and to return both inpatients and outpatients to our facilities. Next slide, please. This is our ambulatory volume. Again, we report blue, the in-person visits, and orange is, or gold, are the telehealth visits. And we continue to see great progress in resumption of our in-person ambulatory visits, as well as a continuation of using telehealth. So telehealth will continue to be an important sector of our ability to deliver healthcare to our patients. Next slide, please. And these are our system census data for inpatients, normalized by our average census. Again, our average census across the University of California often exceeds 100%. This was the year before the pandemic. You see the deep declines in April and May and where we've come up at this point. We are skirting 100%, but we have not quite returned to where we were before. Next slide, please. We're also doing a lot to understand how we're caring for patients across UC Health and sharing that knowledge with others, especially the FDA. These data just show our use of corticosteroids across the organization. The bluer the color, the cooler the color, the less they were being used in the care of COVID patients, the hotter the color, the more they're being used. And so we can track it by calendar day, how many doses of steroids we're using, for example, over here. And we do it for all of the COVID-19 medications that we're using. We share these data with the FDA, and our Center for Data-Driven Insights has recently received a grant to continue this work from the FDA. We also share it with the Association of American Medical Colleges And people nationally are looking at the trends of how we're treating our patients and what their recovery is. These are drugs that are given routinely, like corticosteroids, and they also include drugs that are under investigation in our clinical trials. Next slide, please. When I prepared these slides in early September, I found myself wanting to say one of the pieces of good news was that we were bringing on the third clinical trial for another vaccine. The phase 3 clinical trial testing of the AstraZeneca COVID-19 vaccine was to begin at UCSF, UCLA, and UC San Diego. That trial is currently on pause, as many of you will have heard through the news, due to a neurologic complication in a trial participant that has been described as perhaps being transverse myelitis, though we haven't seen the full medical records. This was the second neurological complication of this vaccine. There was one previously reported in June that appeared to be a case of multiple sclerosis that was not attributed to the vaccine. But of course, now there's much more scrutiny on this vaccine. Although the United Kingdom has agreed that the trial can resume, we are still waiting recommendations here in the United States. So as of today, I believe we are still on pause, but following it closely. Next slide, please. We've talked a lot about health disparities and about the importance of equity in everything that we do related to COVID-19. We know that it is the Black, Latino, and Indigenous communities that have suffered the most from COVID-19. And I want to highlight this bus at the University of California, San Diego, that is taking vaccine trials to underserved communities in an effort to increase enrollment from the communities that have been hit most hard by COVID-19. This is an excellent example of trying to build health equity across our system and inclusion in important efforts such as vaccine trials. Next slide, please. And finally, I couldn't, again, as a pediatrician, I couldn't let this go. We opened just in August the 30th accredited milk bank in North America. This is the first nonprofit milk bank in Southern California, and it is the first university-operated milk bank in North America. It is also the very first University of California Health co-branded program, and it is the first and only milk bank to open during COVID-19. This milk bank, which is located at UC San Diego, will support preterm infants across the state, and we hope will bring better outcomes and better survivability to these very vulnerable infants. So I think this was a huge accomplishment and one that we're very proud to recognize. Next slide, please. And finally, this is a picture of starting school. You've already heard much from Regent Perez, from President Drake, from our academic senate lead, Dr. Govain, about where we are and the return to school. University of California Health was extremely pleased and privileged to work with the campuses through the UC Health Coordinating Committee for COVID-19. And I have watched the chancellors, their associate chancellors, their faculty and staff embrace science, embrace public health, and take difficult decisions for the safety and well-being of their students, faculty, and staff. They have decreased campus density. They are offering primarily remote learning at all of our institutions. They have decreased dormitory occupancy to single occupancy and have prioritized those students who have no other options but to be in a dormitory where that represents the safest option for them. They are requiring non-pharmaceutical interventions, masks, social distancing, physical distancing, engineering controls to make our buildings safer. They've mandated the influenza vaccine. We've worked since February to create testing capacity for the entire system, including our campuses, that would allow us to test individuals routinely. All of our campuses have adopted a testing strategy where you would need 2 negative tests as you return back to campus, 1 before you return and 1 after a 7 to 10 day sequester. We believe that this is going to be of vital importance for safety. And all of our campuses are adopting periodic asymptomatic testing. They have trained case investigators, and they are working with their county and local public health departments for contact tracing. And then finally, as you've heard from President Drake and others, we've embraced scientific pilots to test wastewater, to see if we can make the campuses safer by monitoring our buildings and focusing which people to test in those buildings, and by partnering with Apple and Google and the state of California for pilots on exposure notification, using the cell phone technology that we carry each day to help give us an identification or a heads up if we come into contact with someone who's known to have COVID-19. All of these things represent best practices across the nation, and we all hold our breath as we've seen colleges across the nation start and falter and stumble and have to change course. I was able to hear yesterday from the chancellors at both Berkeley and Merced, who've been back in operation now for nearly 3 weeks, keeping their COVID-19 positivity rates below 1% and we're not experiencing large outbreaks. We continue to be hopeful that the courses that we have chosen and the measures that we have taken will protect our campuses. We are now beginning to work again with the state of California to ensure that we are aligned with them, that we continue to protect the health and safety of our students, faculty, and staff, and that our campuses do not accelerate the pandemic. So as we enter into the next month, we'll be watching everything very closely and working again at our top speed to ensure that everything is in place to protect our students, faculty, and staff. So thank you very much. This concludes my remarks, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Dr. Byington. First, I'd like to recognize Regent Makarishian.
Thank you, Dr. Byington. And personally, I want to thank you for all that you do for the University of California, the state of California, and all of us. This is such an important subject, and probably the most important subject. It's life and death, the economy, leisure, and everything else. So thank you for everything that you do for us. And I especially want to thank you for including those charts in your presentation. I have a few questions. One is in one of your slides you show, and you explain that, California, Texas, and maybe Florida, they have the highest number of hospitalization. And you mentioned that in California, we have 73,000 beds, and we are very prepared. And that may be one of the reasons that we have the lowest, one of the lowest mortality rates. But New York and New Jersey being the highest, is that just because of the number of hospital beds that were available in those areas that we have such a high, they have such a high death rate? That's one question. And then I have 2 or 3 other questions.
So I think what we saw in New York, New Jersey, Massachusetts, was that their bed capacity was overwhelmed by the intense surge that happened in the spring. You've been following my presentations for months, Regent Makarishian, and you know that the peak number of cases of inpatients that we've seen across the University of California system in all 12 of our hospitals is 272. there were individual hospitals in New York with 400, 500, 700, 800 COVID patients on ventilators, requiring intensive care. And it wasn't necessarily an issue of space, but an issue of personnel. That many people who were expert in critical care were just not available to care for these patients. And we've heard so many stories from our colleagues on the East Coast, and it is that keeps every healthcare worker awake at night. We do not want that to happen in our state or in our hospitals.
Okay, that makes sense. And then the other graph that you had, the 30-day mortality for inpatients by age, is that for every health issue, or is just purely for COVID?
These are for every patient that we have identified as a COVID positive patient across the University of California health system.
Okay, so that's not that. Okay, so that's just purely for COVID.
That's correct. Yes.
And then I have another one, and the COVID death rates. You have the COVID death rates. That's one of the graphs that I was asking for, and then you have heart attack death rates, and you have everything else. The COVID death rates, do they include the other issues that are perhaps somebody that had a heart attack was COVID positive, but then if they had pre-existing heart problems, for instance, is that counted in the heart attacks, or is that counted in the COVID death rate?
So the way it works in a hospital is we code all of the illnesses that an individual has when they are hospitalized. And it is up to the physician at the time of death to say, what was the cause of death. And you are right that many people who have underlying heart disease or who have underlying diabetes or obesity, those problems may contribute to the mortality that they're seeing from COVID-19. But we still believe that for the vast majority of these deaths that we're reporting, that the death was from COVID. They may have the underlying conditions, but now they've gotten COVID, and it has worsened to the point where they have died from the COVID-19 infection.
That makes sense too. And then on your graph of the revenues, do those revenue losses, do they include the reimbursements of the government? Are they? No, they're not. They don't. Okay, that makes sense too. Then my last question is regarding vaccine. As we hear so many different stories about vaccine, and different countries producing it, Russia is providing Mexico, China is providing Middle Eastern countries, and so on and so forth. And then you hear about Pittsburgh and UCSF coming up with all these sprays or medications that actually neutralize the virus. Could you explain to us, number one, is that if the vaccine comes up, would we ever get to a position that we trusted that you would say, just like the flu, you would say all the students and all the faculty and everybody else that comes in, steps into University of California must have this vaccine? Will we get to that point? And if that point, would that be something like within a year, within 5 years? Because there's so many different stories about the vaccine that it makes it scary as to people doing it. And then I look at our chairman is, knock on wood, is so healthy and is in a perfect shape. So maybe the COVID is not that bad anyways.
Okay, there's a lot in that question.
That was a compliment, Mr. Chair.
I'll take the compliment. I was incredibly lucky that I had a mild case. And even though there's a theory about what antibodies, I test positive now for antibodies, and there's a theory about how long that is, that doesn't minimize my imperative to use all of the protective measures that I did even before testing positive, because I don't want to risk, either transmitting to somebody being unaware, or having the possibility of being re-exposed. And I think, I'll defer to Dr. Byington and others, but but until we have clear answers, we must be as safe and take every protocol into account as possible.
Totally agree.
Yeah, and I too am very grateful that Regent Perez has recovered. I cannot dismiss COVID-19 as being not that bad. I do hope within a year I can stand here in front of you and say the vaccine trials have been completed, the data have been analyzed, and at least one vaccine is safe and efficacious. If we have that evidence that a vaccine is safe and efficacious, it has been through the FDA, it has been through the CDC Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices, a committee that I used to sit on. I was on that, I was the American Academy of Pediatrics representative to that committee for 6 years and have gone to those meetings. I know how they scrutinize the evidence. If we have the evidence of safety and efficacy, we're already discussing at UC Health that we will mandate a vaccine for our employees across the health center. And I think it's something to bring to President Drake in the same way that we would bring to the flu vaccine about whether it would be something required for our campus populations as well.
All right, thank you. And could you comment on that?
Curtis here for you. He's on his way up the hill.
Is it possible for you to comment on that Pittsburgh and UCSF drug that was just announced?
Both of them are very promising antibodies that bind to SARS-CoV-2 or the receptor that and can neutralize. And the idea of monoclonal antibodies, or even these tinier, these are much smaller antibodies that UCSF and Pittsburgh have identified. There are many opportunities to deliver them to human beings, and there are different delivery mechanisms being investigated. UCSF is looking at a inhaled inhalation of the antibody. Pittsburgh is looking in the animal models. They injected the antibodies, but they're also looking at a patch technology. So a patch like a Band-Aid could be placed on your body to deliver. So they're investigating how to deliver these. Clinical trials must occur. And so human clinical trials will have to occur before we can widely use them. But as I've said from the very beginning, we have made all of the facilities of UC Health open for every promising clinical trial. It is an imperative for us to participate, to bring the diverse patient populations and to test out these medications and bring them to the actual clinical setting as quickly as possible.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you again. Thank you for all your effort, and thank you for including all those slides in your presentation. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Regent Makarishian. I have several regents seeking recognition. The next few are Regent Lansing, followed by Regent Suarez and Regent Riley, and then I'll continue to proceed from there. Regent Lansing, you're recognized.
Yes, thank you. First of all, Dr. Byington, thank you again for everything that you're doing, and thank you for your extraordinary leadership during this time. I have 3 questions. The first is, I understand how long it's going to take for a vaccine, but I haven't heard you talk in this presentation about what I guess you refer to as the point of care or the point of contact test, where you would be able to know within 5 minutes or 15 minutes whether you had COVID. And it would be a simple saliva test, almost like getting your temperature taken. I've heard of several institutions and several pharmaceutical companies that they say are ready with these tests and getting FDA approval. I won't name them, but I've read about them. And if that happened, it seems to me that that would open us up, because if we knew that we were safe for, say, a day, then we could go to a restaurant or we could go to a class, whatever, and feel secure, because I understand these tests will be like $1 eventually. So can you comment on what's happening with these tests?
Absolutely. You've summarized it really well. So there are a number of these tests that are coming for FDA emergency use authorization. We are investigating at all of our campuses and in our clinical laboratories, trying to validate the use of saliva, the use of these rapid tests. The antigen test in particular, that there was a lot of press and publicity last month. The White House has purchased the entire stock of 150 million tests. And we are hoping to find from the state, our understanding is the White House will distribute these tests to the states, and we're hoping then to work with the state to bring some of them, onto our campuses and facilities. But we're waiting to hear about those. Those are already licensed. We're also working to develop our own testing and our own, experimental testing. And President Drake and the chancellors have asked me to convene another task force on testing infrastructure. And we're developing that system-wide task force. We meet next week, and we'll be reviewing all of these tests to see how can we create an infrastructure for UC Health that can support rapid, low-cost testing that will augment what's being able to be offered in our clinical laboratories.
So can I just ask at our health service meeting or at the next meeting that we also have as the Regents that you bring us up to date on where we are with that testing? Because I think that's going to happen before the vaccine is officially approved, at least from what I'm reading. And the way that I understand it, as I just said, it would open up the country because you would, just like a woman opens her purse up after 9/11 when we go into an event. So I just would like more details because I read about this lab and this group and this university as to the reality of some of these things. But thank you. My second question, and these are two questions that I'm constantly asked and I don't have the answer to. Excuse me, I don't have COVID, that's the smoke. So my second question is, what is the data on after you've had COVID, possible re-exposure and getting it a second time?
Okay, so getting COVID once appears to produce antibodies in most people. The CDC has published that those antibodies persist at least 3 months and may persist longer than that. We just haven't had the chance to follow people of time. There are a number of reports, a handful, maybe 5, of people who have gotten COVID a second time, and that it really looks like it was a second infection. Those are quite rare. And so I still have hope that there is protection from COVID infection, and that antibody will persist for a period of months and protect you. And if it's not going to protect you from fully getting an infection, it may make the second infection milder. So I think that's really where we are.
Oh, we all know.
And we're trying to now look at these other antibodies, as Regent Macarishan talked about. Can we, harness the most effective antibodies that the body produces, scale those up and give them to people? And I think that's the next stage that we'll see, again, perhaps even before the vaccine is widely available, that we may all take antibody shots to, give us some protection.
And then just get a mild case, hopefully, that like a
mild
cold
case or no case. That
yeah. So the third question I have, and that's my last question, which is, again, a point of information. So we have been told for protective measures, and I think all of us, at least everyone I know, follows them very seriously, distancing, masks, and being outside. So now, as it gets colder and as the country gets colder, it's going to be very hard for people to continue to eat outside. And I'm not talking even about going to a restaurant. I mean, just have somebody on your patio or whatever it is. My question that I constantly am asked, if you only have 2 people or 3 people or whatever it is, and you're 10 feet apart, and you both, or this group has been extremely careful. I'm not talking about 40 people gathering together, not social distancing. If you are very far apart and you're inside because of the weather, what is the danger compared to being outside? Do you know what I'm saying? I mean, this is like, because I'm really going into November, December, January, February, and certainly even in California, it gets to be too cold and people have a need to socialize. And so what is the risk if you're 10 feet apart and you're having a meal as compared to being outside and you're 10 feet apart?
Right. Outside is always going to be less of a risk. And it's one of the reasons we think that the COVID positivity rate and number of cases will increase in the winter is just for this exact reason, that more people come inside and they feel like they don't want to be so isolated. They want to be with friends and family. We have the winter holidays that come up, and those are usually large family celebrations. Those are part of our tradition. So again, to make things as safe as possible, and the risk won't be zero, the fewest numbers of people possible together. I would continue to recommend small gatherings, short gatherings, people wearing masks for as much of the time as possible, except maybe when they're eating. And keeping, if you can open a window to keep ventilation going or have airflow going, you're never going to bring the risk to zero. And it's also going to mean choosing carefully who you bring inside your house. And so understanding how they've been physically distancing, how they've been protecting themselves, who their contacts are. My hope is as we get further into the year 21, that there will be more rapid testing available, and you can actually add another layer on by saying, you know, we're going to test and then come together. But
yes,
we're not going to be able to let down our defenses completely and to gather in the way that we used to, large groups crowded inside a house. And so always thinking about harm reduction, fewer people, shorter gatherings, masks whenever possible, perhaps testing when it's available. These are going to be the things that help protect us.
And further distancing, you know, if it was 6 feet outside, maybe it should be 10 feet inside. That wouldn't hurt, or is it irrelevant?
We just don't have the data, but
yeah,
but no, it wouldn't hurt.
It wouldn't hurt. Thank you, because I mean, my concern is, and I'm done then. And again, thank you for your leadership. Is everybody's so careful to eat outside, to be 8 feet apart, but that's not sustainable in the winter, and it's not sustainable to assume that people will never ever see another human being for 5 or 6 months. So I was just trying to answer the questions that I'm always asked. So I thank you very much, as always, for this extraordinary report. Thank you.
Thank you. Regent Suarez, followed by Regent Riley, and then Regent Kiefer, and I'll proceed from there.
Dr. Byington, thank you also for your report. I thought it was excellent. I have 2 questions. One is regarding the potential surge that might happen in the fall or in the early winter. And what is the level of preparation that the University of California is doing? And is there any modeling that's been done to predict what level of surge we may or may not have?
No, we have surge plans across University of California Health, and we've been looking at those surge plans and optimizing our PPE supply. We work with the state. Again, there's no way to predict, I would say, with real accuracy more than a month in the future. But we have done everything we can to try to predict what the season would look like with flu, without flu, with an increase in cases that, you know, could be expected because of the cold weather and people gathering together. We believe we're ready at UC Health and that our facilities are ready. As you recall, we added 1,500 new beds that we could surge capacity of 1,500 new beds early in the spring. We've not had to use those beds yet, but if we had to, we could. The biggest issues will be with personnel, keeping our personnel healthy and and keeping our units staffed appropriately. And that is always the biggest challenge.
Got it. And my second question is, down the road, I see it coming, but this controversial issue of equitable distribution of the vaccine and who's going to get the vaccine first, and what are we going to do as an institution to make sure there is an equitable distribution, and those that are, might not be, how are we going to determine who gets it first and who gets it second, third, and fourth? Have you put thought into that, and do you have a plan in place for that yet?
We do. So if you recall, early in the pandemic, we brought you members of the bioethics committee who presented the equitable distribution of ventilators. Do you recall that? Yeah, that same group, a system-wide bioethics group, has been talking about the equitable distribution of vaccine for some time. We will be informed by the National Academy of Medicine report, which has outlined the groups that would receive vaccine first. We participated in the public comment for that, and we actually had a member from UC Berkeley, Art Reingold, who's part of our committee, who participated in the creation of that report. That report is going now to the Centers for Disease Control and the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practice, who will ultimately determine if a vaccine is safe and then how it will be rolled out. And we will look at the science and we will look at these reports, but we're not afraid to make recommendations that we think may be, more appropriate if it's necessary.
I just want to make sure that as we do that those that are most vulnerable and those that we've spoken about in our vulnerable communities really do have access to this vaccine and that they're not put behind. I think that's critical for us as an institution to take a leadership role in that area.
We agree, definitely.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Regent Suarez. Now Regent Riley, followed by Regents Kiefer and Stigura.
Thank you, and thank you, Dr. Byington. My question is, how are we doing in California in terms of our testing supplies? Are we still facing a shortage of those supplies?
There is always stress on the testing supply chain, and it's one object or another object. And so what we've done at the University of California is really try to broaden our portfolio so that if there is a tests and test equipment, machines that we use, so that if there is a breakdown in a supply chain over here, we can pivot to another. Now, as we move into the fall, we're going to be investigating bringing the SwabSeq technology that we talked about last time at UCLA that has received emergency authorization. We want to optimize that at UCLA, and can we place that at other UC institutions to support our campuses and maybe to support beyond our own campuses. Again, it uses a different supply chain and a different testing set of reagents.
And what about the lag time between testing and receiving results? Because I know that's been a big issue.
One of our goals from the very beginning, and I am a person who's always worked in diagnostic testing. It's something that I felt prepared for, but from the very beginning, we've had a goal of return of results in less than 24 hours. And that is something that we have been able to do across UC Health in all of our clinical laboratories and in our surveillance testing as well. Our goal is to get that test turned around in 24 hours, because every day that you delay makes the test and your ability to act on that test more difficult. And after about 3 days, the utility of the test is really not there anymore, because the person may have gone and done other things. So we have always had a goal of testing turnaround under 24 hours, and we are meeting that goal.
That's great. We are hearing so much too about the long-term effects of COVID, even after you are no longer positive. What can you tell us about that, and what population is most susceptible to those long-term post-COVID effects?
I don't think we know the population most susceptible yet, but our medical centers and our faculty practices are now creating post-COVID clinics that are multidisciplinary post-COVID clinics. And this will allow us to collect the data that really says, you know, who is it most at risk? And we have anecdotes. We've all seen individuals. The individuals I tend to see seem to be younger. But again, I'm a pediatrician, so I have a lens there, and I think having these clinics and collecting the data systematically through our enterprise data warehouse will allow us to begin to answer these questions.
Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you.
Regent Kiefer, followed by Stigura, Oakley, Muwakil, Estelano, and Horowitz. Regent Kiefer.
Thank you, Dr. Byington. I want to go back to something I wasn't clear on, and I don't know that how far you can estimate on this, but what's your expectation again about return to classroom? What's your expectation about return to these board meetings in a more normal person-to-person basis?
So I presented data to you all in February, and I haven't really changed my perception. In the United States, we would expect to be at 50 to 60% herd immunity in July of 2022, either through natural infection or for immunization. So I believe that we will still be undergoing these modifications, accommodations for the virus for at least another year. And I hope that they will continue to decline as we bring new therapeutics on board, new tests on board, and that the vaccine, hopefully we identify a vaccine and can roll out that vaccine. But I am still planning on a year of disruption with hope that between September of 21 and July of 22, we'll continue to see lessening disruption each month. But this is not something that will go away quickly. The pandemic of 1918, which is the one that we would compare this to most easily, was about 4 years before things began to really change and improve.
So just to clarify, your expectation would be that in January, our situation on the campuses will not be much different than it is today. And even by September of next year, it may not be much different than it is today.
I think that is an accurate summary of my feelings. I have talked with the chancellors and I do think that we will not be back to normal by January, and that we need to plan now for what the winter quarter or winter semester looks like. And again, winter brings other risk factors, including the need to be inside, the need for heat, and the other respiratory viruses that co-circulate during the winter months.
Thank you.
Thanks. Regent Stigura.
Thank you. And thank you, Dr. Byington, very much for your report. The data about 20 to 29-year-olds is kind of concerning, as two of my 3 children are in that age group.
Mine too.
One is on an airplane right now. But that said, Regent Kiefer's question was a good lead in. So let's talk about campuses. You know, to the extent that there are any students or staff or faculty right now on campus physically, obviously the key to containment is controlling reinfection. So do you know, or maybe a couple of the chancellors would be able to answer some of the novel enforcement, coercion, social pressure techniques that are being used to enforce masks, social distancing, hand washing, and things like that.
Yes, I think I saw that Chancellor Christ was on, and she has students who are back, or perhaps Michael Brown might comment, or one of the other chancellors. There are a number of things that they're doing to work with their students, and I would like to give them the opportunity to answer that question. I don't know who might be.
Chancellor Christ, would you like to comment?
Sure, I'd be delighted to. At Berkeley, we have a social norms campaign. We have masks on all the bears on campus. And we do a lot of messaging, but the students themselves have been really good. So we've had students back for about 3 weeks. For the students in the dorms, we have no new cases, and they've been using social media to themselves monitor compliance. The biggest risk we have, frankly, is something that's hard for us to control, which is off-campus parties.
Similarly, at UC Merced, we've initiated a number of campaigns as well. Here we're referring to it as Do Your Part, messaging to the students, traditional emails, social media campaign, etc. We've also enlisted the support of local leaders, and our mayor has sent a very generous, thoughtful welcome to our students, as well as reminding them that we all live in Merced together and must all do our part. Additionally, I've partnered with the local president of Merced College, our colleague Chris Vitelli, and we've issued a joint op-ed piece and a series of pieces that have occurred in local media about doing our part collectively as a system of higher education in the city of Merced. And as in the case of UC Berkeley, as of this moment, we have no additional new cases of infection.
Chancellor Khosla.
Listen, thank you, Regent Perez. I really appreciate this. So we have not started classes yet, but our population process has started beginning yesterday. So we are doing multimedia campaigns, including TikTok, Instagram, a lot of banners around campus. But the one I'm most excited about is defining a pod of between 8 to 12 students where they get tested together, they quarantine together, and they move into the same location together. And they become a social pod, just like a family, where they can socialize and not be isolated during the time they're here, and therefore, hopefully, not get into behaviors that lead to bad outcomes. So.
Very good. Regent Segura, back to you.
Thank you.
Does that come? Okay, very good. Regent Oakley, followed by Regent Muakil.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll try to be very brief. First, a question for Dr. Byington. I want to get back to a question raised by Regent Makarishan on this issue of coding. I think it's important, particularly for the University of California, to be very clear, because there is this thread throughout the country of conspiracy on top of conspiracy that our medical centers are coding patients who pass away with COVID for the purpose of accessing funds from the federal government. Can you clarify that just so that we're very clear with the public about how and when we code a COVID fatality?
Right. I can say with great confidence that we are not coding individuals who die as COVID for the purpose of receiving funds. We have always reported the number of cases that we have accurately, even to the point where we've been excluded from receiving funds because we report as individual hospitals rather than as an entire system. What you are seeing is the normal coding practices in the United States. When you code for COVID-19 as a cause of death, I feel very confident that the providers caring for those patients believe that COVID-19 was the cause of death.
Thank you for that. And then I just have a quick comment regarding some of the questions that Regent Kiefer and Regent Stigura asked. I mean, clearly, you know, our main concern is the students of the University of California. And of course, many of those students mingle with students from the California State University, from the community colleges. And so I think the more clarity we can give our students throughout the remainder of the academic year, and I know President Drake and I have discussed this. This is a major topic for all of us in California in higher education. I think the more that we can come together and ensure that, continue to ensure, because I'm not questioning that whether or not we ensure that we're putting students' health and safety first and foremost. And, you know, we've all seen what has happened in some of our sister East Coast schools or in other states. When we bring students together, they do what students do. Mm-hmm. And I think sometimes we put the blame on them rather than put the blame on us. If we bring 18 and 19-year-olds together, they're going to congregate. And so I think, you know, I look forward to doing anything I can do to support the chancellors in this very difficult situation for the remainder of the academic year. But I just wanted to state that so that we can continue to all work together to provide clarity to all the students in our higher education institutions. Thank you.
And this, I will just comment that the state of California has brought us together. Just this week, the University of California system, and I had the opportunity to represent CSU was there and the community colleges, and this is going to become a regular working group to align our messaging to students and to align the processes and procedures that we have. We can't declare victory yet. And we've done a lot to protect our students. We've watched what's happened in the East Coast with the hospitals, and we felt like we protected and crushed the curve early on in California, only to see California escalate in the summer and become, you know, a high intensity spot within the United States. We're watching what's happening to college campuses now, and we cannot be overconfident. We have to be constantly vigilant to ensure that that doesn't also happen here in California.
Very good. Regent Muakil, followed by Estolano, Horowitz, and Torres. But before I go there, Dr. Drake, did you have a response, or do you just want to be in the queue in the normal order?
Yeah, just a quick response, and thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to say, as we look at the national experience with students, we've seen an interesting phenomenon, and that is that the overwhelming majority of students are behaving entirely responsibly, and that's been great. There have been small numbers who behaved in an irresponsible way and been super spreaders, but I think the experience has been that those activities have been seen by many other students, and the peer pressure among students to be safe themselves and behave as the responsible adults they are is helping them to flatten the opportunity for inspection as we're moving through this the quarter and semester. So I think that peer pressure is going to continue to be incredibly important. I think that our students are young adults, but they're adults, and that overwhelmingly they're responsible. So I've been very proud of the way that they've responded so far, and I look forward to continuing to encourage them to do so. I know from so many years that the instructions and guidance that we give them is sometimes not as powerful to them as their own peer pressure, and I think that they're doing a great job of keeping themselves safe.
Thank you. Regent Muakil, Estolano, Horowitz, and then Torres.
Thank you, Chair. Really appreciate the opportunity. Thank you, Dr. Byington. I just want to reiterate how much of a treasure you are to the University of California, and we're so fortunate to have you, especially in this time. So I'd love your comments on a given point. Regent Suarez made a point that we should have equitable distribution of any vaccine that is developed, and I agree with that wholeheartedly. With a mind towards our history as a nation, of unequal access to resources, including medical care, there is, however, another side to that equation. As is especially relevant in the current national politics, there's not a lot of trust in government and medical administration. This is exacerbated in communities of color, and their reluctance to trust government-relayed medical advice is rooted in historical precedent. My mind goes to the Tuskegee experiments, as well as the recent accusations of medical mistreatment in ICE facilities. As we are planning and building infrastructure for testing and potentially administering the vaccine, can you speak to any plans that you have to shore up public trust in whatever vaccine is delivered? How can we assuage doubts about the vaccine from communities who have historically been victimized, that this is not another example of that?
You know, you bring up one of the most difficult challenges of the pandemic and one of the most difficult challenges that we face today. What I have seen work in the past is to directly engage communities, to work with the leaders of those communities, and to work in venues that are not in the ivory tower, if you will, but to be on the ground. My own practice of medicine has always been about being on the ground and showing up and being present in a community, you know, for over time, and to build that trust. Our UCs have lots of community connections and interactions, and we need to use all of those to help build trust in the science and in the vaccine. Like you, I'm horrified to hear the reports about the ICE detainees, and have written myself about trust in science related to the Tuskegee experiments, to Henrietta Lacks and others. I have an editorial coming out October 7th. I'll share it with the regents, but we will have to work very hard in this area. Our country is polarized right now, and everything is politicized. And how do we convince and people that that the science is in their best interest? This is going to be a very difficult challenge.
Absolutely. Thank you for your response, and thank you. I look forward to reading your report, your comments there. And I just want to echo your sentiments. Thank you for your response. It's not just the difficulty in developing the vaccine, but also engendering the trust amongst the people who would take it, such that they know that it's safe. And how we can demonstrate that is going to be a challenge. So we look forward to being thought partners with you in that endeavor. Thank you.
Thank you. Regents Estolano, Horowitz, Torres, and then I think we will probably move on to the next item. So Regent Estolano.
Dr. Byington, again, thank you. I'm actually was going to address that similar issue as a comment, and then I have two specific questions on other matters. On the issue of equity guidelines for the distribution of the vaccine, I was heartened in your remarks to hear you say that the University of California was fully prepared to have an independent analysis and recommendation about those guidelines to the state of California. I think many of us are counting on the University of California to be that independent voice. So I wanted to commend your statement and think that's going to be important in messaging that however the vaccine and those guidelines come down from the National Academy of Science, then it goes to the CDC. That concerned me. So knowing that you all will have a separate analysis and evaluation is really important. So my two specific questions. One, the 150 million a supply of 150 million rapid tests that you say were acquired by the White House, the entire supply. Is there a sense of when those might be distributed?
No. We have no information. We have used our connections to try to understand that. The states are waiting to understand. We've seen this with the distribution of other supplies before, remdesivir, you know how difficult that was in the very beginning. And so, you know, we're waiting, but we have no access to those materials right now.
Thank you. And then back on, similarly on distribution of supplies, on the surge that is anticipated in the fall and the winter, and you noted that you think you're prepared, right? But that the pressure,
Knocking on wood, yeah.
but you also noted that the pressure point was a lot about our own personnel. And I wanted to ask you, do you have a high degree of confidence that we will have an adequate supply of PPE for our medical personnel and supporting personnel as well? For the RNs, we had a person in public comment note concerns about having access to PPE. And I just wanted you to be able to address that directly, particularly in light of the surge that we anticipate in the fall and winter.
Yeah. The adequate supply of PPE has been a continuous priority for University of California Health from the very beginning, from January, counting our numbers and putting them away for when we knew we would need them later, and purchasing PPE as we were able to. So a couple of things, every one of our campuses tracks PPE daily, sometimes twice a day, like twice a day, every 12 hours. We have a very acute knowledge of our PPE supply. We are using N95s for all COVID patients and all COVID suspected patients. And we have a classification system for PPE across our system, green, yellow, red. Green means we have 42 days on hand. And yellow is less than that, and red is less than that. And we have activities that we implement if we were to go to yellow or red. All campuses are in green today. We have also worked very hard to have a system-wide contract with a US distributor by the name of Halyard for N95 masks in particular. We have been able to get a very good price on those masks and assurance that we will have a 45-day supply at any time that we need it to be delivered. We expect the first delivery in November. And so we feel like we have done absolutely everything to have the best PPE supplies. And I would say that our PPE across the University of California would rival any hospital in the United States for preparedness, for supply. Will it be enough? A lot depends on our own behavior, and what happens this winter. I don't know how we could get any more. We have millions of requested and pre-purchased, millions of these masks, and our CEOs have built storage and the supply chain, and so we've worked really hard. And I am as confident, I think, as anyone can be that we have sufficient PPE.
And Dr. Byington, just on the point in particular about the protocols for who gets access to that PPE, it's available. You talked about it's being available anytime there's a patient that's coded as COVID-19, but our RNs and other allied health personnel and other support in our hospitals able to access that supply. So I want you to address that. I don't know if you heard that comment in public.
I did hear it, and where we have a difference of opinion, I would say, is that we know how important PPE is for those who test positive for COVID or who are suspected of having COVID-19. We test every patient in the hospital. We have confidence in the testing that we have in the hospital. And we provide PPE, including N95 masks, for all COVID positive and all of those who are suspected of having COVID. And even for patients who are completely asymptomatic and they're coming in for a surgical procedure or a broken arm, they've still been tested. And where I think there is some difference of opinion with the unions, there are union members who would like N95 masks for all patients, all the time, any patient. We don't have a sufficient supply for that. We just don't. And so we are using N95s and the equipment that we have, prioritizing it by the diagnosis in an effort to be sure that when we get to the winter, those supplies will be there.
Thank you.
Faculty Representative Horowitz, followed by Regent Torres.
Thank you. I have great confidence in UC Health, and that's been reinforced by your presentation, Dr. Byington. I have a lot less confidence in the CDC and FDA these days. And I'm wondering whether the interaction, the dependence of UC Health on the CDC and the FDA compromises UC Health's mission.
Thank you for that comment and question. As someone who's worked with the CDC my entire life, I have never been in a position to doubt their guidance or to do something that contradicts their guidance. But we have done it. So the CDC did not recommend testing of students returning to campus. Our subject matter experts believe that that was incorrect. And so we made the recommendation not only to test students coming back to campus once, but to test them twice before we enter into periodic surveillance. Recently, the CDC made a statement that those who are asymptomatic but exposed do not need to be tested. We disagree with that. The UC system made a standard set of guidance that defines an exposure and then defines how you're tested and when you're tested. The FDA now will be investigating the vaccine, and we all understand the normal process and procedure for that and the interaction between the FDA and the CDC. We will be looking for safety and efficacy data. And so it is a position that I never thought that I would be in, but we have subject matter experts here at the University of California that are amongst the best in the world. And we have taken stands that are different than the CDC at least twice.
Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you. Senator Torres.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the board for again supporting Proposition 14. The governor and the speaker, Pelosi, announced to me this morning that they are now in support as well. And just a quick update, we have 3 clinical trials that we have funded for COVID-19. One at UCSF, which was mentioned with Dr. Matheny, another at the City of Hope with convalescent plasma with Dr. Zaya, and one was Cellularity, which is a clinical trial as well. And we also have preclinical trials for brain damage caused by COVID-19. And I'll be providing a report and an update to the members of the board regarding all of these efforts and others that we've been doing in the area. So thank you again for your support.
Thanks, Senator Torres. So Dr. Byington, before we wrap up, I just want to thank you for that really great conversation. I do want to punctuate a point, though, that was made. Actually, 2 separate points. Professor Horowitz talked about folks' concerns about how much faith we can have in the CDC and in certain national guidance that we're getting. We know this morning that the Assistant Secretary for Public Affairs at HHS, Caputo, has stepped down for a 60-day leave, and that Dr. Alexander, the Senior Policy Advisor for Public Affairs, has also stepped down. And there have been questions about really how much science was being able to guide all of the reports coming out of the CDC versus when other areas of pressure may have limited the ability for science to guide this. The reason I'm raising this is, as Regent Estolano has raised, there's still concerns about many of our healthcare professionals throughout the system about whether we're using the right standard for distribution. And early on, the CDC guidance was not what we think it should have been and what it is today with respect to masking and with respect to when masking would be engaged in general and when N95 masks were used. And so I think it's really essential that we keep having the conversations with our employees and their collective bargaining reps to give people comfort around what standard we're using. Because we can't have folks think that it's just a question of managing scarcity, but rather that the management of the PPE is actually aligning with scientific-based evaluations of risk and best practice. And so I think we need to continue to have those conversations, deepen the conversations to give people comfort, because what we also know is all of the folks in our healthcare system are under tremendous stress on a day-to-day basis. Really, in many ways, an unprecedented stress. And so I think it's incumbent upon us to deepen those conversations, deal with that stress in whatever way possible, to validate the concerns and help people get comfort with whether or not we're using the right standards. Because the last thing we want to do is have people think that it's just managing scarcity as opposed to aligning with the best evidence that we have. So I know you've been having those conversations. I want to encourage you and others within our health system to continue to have those conversations and deepen the buy-in. With that, I want to let you have any final comments before we move on, but thank you again.
Thank you, and I do appreciate your comments, Chair Perez. I meet monthly with the health professional unions, and we are always trying to hear their concerns and also to convey how we are managing things. As a system, we were amongst the very first in the nation to go to universal masking, to universal testing of our patients in order to protect. And we have a very low rate of our healthcare workers who test positive. And so we feel like we're doing an excellent job of protecting this workforce. We understand the stress that the workforce is under and are constantly looking at ways to increase the safety of our environment. So this is a overriding priority of the pandemic for UC Health. So thank you.
Thank you so much. With that, that concludes item B1 on our agenda. Before we break into committees, I'd like to have a motion to approve the minutes of the July 29th meeting of the Board of Regents.
I'll move it. I'll move it, second it.
Moved by Regent Suarez, seconded by Regent Lansing. The secretary will please call the roll.
Okay, just to be clear, these are for the July Wednesday board minutes. Anguiano? Blum? Butler?
Aye.
Butler, aye. Drake?
I'll abstain. Thank you. I wasn't a regent then.
Drake abstain. Elliott? Estolano?
Aye.
Estolano, aye. Goober?
Aye.
Goober, aye. Kiefer?
Aye.
Kiefer, aye. Kounalakis?
Aye.
Kounalakis, aye. Lansing?
Aye.
Lansing, aye. Lieb?
Aye.
Lieb, aye. Makarishian?
Aye.
Makarishian, aye. Mart?
Aye.
Mart, aye. Muwakil?
Aye.
Muwakil, aye. Ortiz Oakley?
Aye.
Ortiz Oakley, aye. Park?
Aye.
Park, aye. Perez?
Aye.
Perez, aye. Riley?
Aye.
Riley, aye. Sherman?
Aye.
Sherman, aye. Stigura?
Aye.
Stigura, aye. Suarez?
Aye.
Suarez, aye. Zettel?
Aye.
Zettel, aye. I'm just going to circle back. Anguiano? Blum?
Blum, you're still muted, Regent Blum. You're still muted.
Mute. Aye.
Blum, aye.
Right.
Great. Okay. Minutes approved.
Wonderful. Very good. That concludes this morning's full board meeting, and we will now be moving to our committee meetings. We will have a roughly 30-minute meeting of the National Labs Committee, followed by a very brief meeting of the Compliance and Audit Committee. With that, I turn this over to the chair of the National Labs Committee, Regent Zettel.
Thank you very much, Chair Perez. This morning, we have just one item on our schedule, a discussion item. But before we begin that, I'd like to have a motion to approve the minutes of July 29. We have a motion.
Second.
Thank you. Anne, would you please call the vote for roll for a vote?
Sure. And this is committee members only. Cohen, Drake.
Abstain again, thank you.
Abstain, Drake abstain. Estolano?
Aye.
Estolano, aye. Kiefer?
Aye.
Kiefer, aye. Kounalakis?
Aye.
Kounalakis, aye. Mart?
Aye.
Mart, aye. Ortiz Oakley?
Aye.
Ortiz Oakley, aye. Perez?
Aye.
Perez, aye. Riley?
Aye.
Riley, aye. Suarez?
Aye.
Suarez, aye. And Zettel?
Aye.
Zettel, aye. Minutes approved, and you have a quorum.
Thank you very much. So we have one discussion item and one, it's an overview of the UC National Laboratory Fees Research Program. Presenting our Vice President for National Laboratories, Craig Leisure, Vice President for Research and Innovation, and the primary sponsor of the UC Lab Fees Research Program, Teresa Maldonado, and UC Merced doctoral alumna and postdoctoral fellow at Livermore Lab, Kimber Moreland. Vice President Leisure. Are you available?
Thank you.
There you go.
Yep, I just barely made it in. Thank you, Chair Zettel. If you could go to the next slide, please. It's our pleasure today to provide the Regents with an overview of UC National Laboratories Fees Research Program. This program is funded with fee income earned from the management of Los Alamos and Lawrence Livermore Labs, activities conducted by my UC National Laboratories Office and administered by the Research Grants Programs Office within the Research and Innovation Division. When management of Los Alamos and Livermore transitioned from UC to the limited liability companies in the mid-2000s, the Regents approved a procedure for allocating LLC fee income on an annual basis. In this resolution, the Regents recognized that the primary use of the fee income should remain funding scientific research, which connects the labs and the UC campuses. The Lab Fees Research Program was established around 2008 in response to this direction from the Regents. This focus on funding research reflects the public service nature of the university's commitment to the national labs and therefore squarely aligns with the mission of the university. The university does not operate the national labs to maximize profit to fund university operations. Rather, the university operates the national labs as a service to the public and the nation to maintain a world-class enterprise of science, technology, and engineering in an environment of intellectual freedom and scientific integrity to address the biggest scientific and security challenges of our time. The Regents have invested more than $170 million of fee income into the Lab Fees Research Program since its inception. The UC National Laboratories Office remains committed to this program and intends to maintain a $10 million annual funding baseline, subject to annual approval of the Regents. This program not only furthers the university's mission, it differentiates UC from other national lab operators where fee income may be viewed as a profit for shareholders or used for purposes unrelated to the national labs. Using fee for scientific research that benefits the labs and the UC campuses is a positive discriminator that UC can point to when it competes again for Los Alamos and Livermore in a few years, or when competing for new labs. I will now turn it over to Vice President Maldonado, who will elaborate on the program and its mutual benefits to UC campuses and the national labs. Teresa.
Thank you very much, Vice President Leisure. As Craig said, since 2008, $170 million have been invested in research and training awards, supporting over 575 student trainees and 380 faculty from all 10 campuses. If you look at the upper right quadrant, the spaghetti bowl there, this visual illustrates how these investments have fostered ongoing collaborations between the 10 campuses and all 3 national labs, forming a powerful research network across the UC system for collective impact. At the bottom of the slide, you will see a multi-campus National Laboratory Collaborative Research and Training Awards statistic. These awards are funded at $60 million over the past 3 years, targeting strategic high-impact areas, including climate science, wildfire prevention and mitigation, as well as cybersecurity and national security social sciences. Finally, the lab fee investments of $170 million were leveraged in securing over $200 million of federal funding. For example, the Berkeley Nuclear Research Center has a 13-to-1 return on investment, including a $12 million Department of Energy center led by Los Alamos. Next slide, please. So how does the National Lab Fee Research Program support students? One of many examples is a $3.75 million of funding to support UC student trainees working at Lawrence Livermore. These trainees contributed to critical environmental analyses after the Fukushima nuclear power plant disaster in 2011. This training of the next generation of nuclear science and safety experts is critical for U.S. national and energy security. A second example is the summer schools and traineeships hosted by UC San Diego, the Center for Frontiers in High Energy Density Science, where students from high school through graduate studies are prepared for research careers in energy and material sciences. These training opportunities at all stages of the career pipeline help UC attract the best and brightest students to all 10 campuses. Research is an integral part of a student's preparation, and research funding supports their critical basic cost of living expenses. The Lab Fee program provides students with unique training opportunities on advanced instrumentation. It develops their self-confidence. It gives them a competitive advantage for other fellowships, and it cultivates their holistic preparation to launch successful careers. To that end, I would like to introduce Dr. Kimber Moreland. Dr. Moreland is a 2020 PhD graduate from UC Merced. She was supported by a prestigious UC National Lab in Residence Fellowship at Lawrence Livermore. Then she leveraged that opportunity to apply for and secure a postdoctoral fellowship at Lawrence Livermore. We invited her here today to share with you the impact of this fellowship opportunity on her training and her career. Dr. Moreland.
Thank you, Teresa, and hi, everybody. Thank you, everyone on the call today. So I'm a soil biogeochemist, and I work day in and day out to try to help soil to mitigate climate change, because we want as much carbon out of the atmosphere and into the soil for as long as possible. And to start at my journey's beginning, I grew up with a bipolar mom and a drug addict dad, and at times I was homeless. So I would have never have envisioned standing in front of you today where I am at. I decided to pursue graduate school because I knew that if I could accomplish this, I could do anything. I chose UC Merced because the passionate advisor and impactful project that I got the opportunity to work on. It was this advisor and her established connections with LLNL that led me to apply for this fellowship. Through this application process, I learned valuable skills to identify the project, the mentorship needs that I had, and practice writing on something that would actually come to pay off in spades and give me a lot of confidence boost in order to move forward into these next parts of my life. When I got to LLNL, I was greeted with a warm welcome with an entire office and my name on the door for the first time in my entire life. In my group, there is an open door policy, so I quickly gained role models and mentors. And through this, I trained about one day every week for 1 year to become a certified operator on one of the 14 of the accelerator mass spectrometers in the United States. Through this, I learned how to take my soil sample from the field, prepare it in the lab, and get my data using the instrument. And we actually discovered 20,000-year-old soil carbon, which is really important because we do really want as much carbon out of the atmosphere and into the soil for as long as possible so we can hold off climate change and its potential impacts. If you could change to the next slide, please. I was encouraged to daydream about important knowledge gaps and then apply these daydream projects to a proposal of a project called the Lab Directed Research Competition, in which I was competing both written and orally with staff scientists and other postdocs. During this process, I was coached and mentored by my entire group, and I ended up placing second in the competition and gained this position as a postdoc on a passion project that is highly societally relevant. Through this process, I not only mentored students from UCM, but I got this postdoc project that I will continue to collaborate with UCM researchers and their students. From my story, I hope you can start to see why this fellowship has truly changed my life, and I can't thank you enough for helping me to get to this moment and discover what my mission on Earth is. Thank you for allowing me to share, and our group is open for questions.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kimber. And I am looking for the participant button here. And can you see if there are any questions?
So far, I don't see any questions.
So if not, I would like to ask, and perhaps this is from Vice President Maldonado. You mentioned that there's a lot of research going on now at the labs, or has been over the years, not only with climate change, but the resultant wildfire situations that we experience and seem to be becoming worse the last few years. Do you foresee that there will be more research directed in this area that's so critical to our health in California and our neighboring states? And now the bad air is filtering across the United States into Europe. So,
and actually, I'm sitting in El Paso, Texas right now, and the smoke made it all the way over here. And we've had like 4 days of 100% haze from the smoke. The answer to your question is yes. And it's important to understand that the awards made through this program are peer reviewed and run out of Dr. Aoki's office on my staff. So we invite faculty from across the UC system, as well as external reviewers, to look at the applications. And I think, this past year, there was a priority area in wildfires. Now we're seeing the complexity of the interdependence of climate change, wildfires, and the pandemic. And there's a lot of concern right now about the impact of the smoke on COVID patients, and also increasing the vulnerability to get COVID because of people or populations having to endure the smoke that's in our air right now. So the short answer to your question is yes. And just understand that these are peer-reviewed projects, so we feel like we're funding the best.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much. Are there any questions? And I can't see.
Yeah, Faculty Representative Gouvain has a question.
Thank you.
Thank you. That was a great presentation. I wanted to ask you if you've had any experience either working with or you envision working with undergraduates in any of these projects.
Oh, absolutely. Well, we know that graduate students are the backbone to research in the University of California. University of California, all 10 campuses embrace the undergraduates in research projects. It's very important to engage them at that level so we can attract them to the graduate level. Number one. Number two, undergraduate research really prepares the students more effectively for whatever discipline they're studying. And I come from engineering, golden experience that it further enhances the in-classroom curriculum. So the answer is yes, and we seek these students on a regular basis, yes.
So Regent Gouvain, I would add that all 3 labs that are affiliated with the university have rich undergraduate student programs. Even this last summer during COVID, all 3 labs went to a mostly virtual approach and brought in as many students and worked with as many students as they possibly could. And we're looking forward to post-COVID when they can come into the laboratories again.
Thank you. And we have a question from Regent Mawako.
Thank you, Chair Zettel, and thank you again for the presentation. I wanted to ask a question related to the last comment made, which was if you can give me a sense of how many graduate students and or undergraduate students that you engage in the national labs vis-a-vis fellowships, and how that number maybe is affected post-COVID, given that we have to be a bit more distanced now.
Sure. Thank you for the question. I'll give you a couple of numbers and I'll follow up back with you with the data. Los Alamos last year brought in 1,800 students into the laboratory during that year. That was undergraduate and graduate students. They're also up around 500 postdoctoral folks as well. Lawrence Livermore, prior to COVID, was on the order of, I believe it's 800 to 1,000 undergraduate and graduate students, and several hundred postdocs as well. Lawrence Berkeley National Lab is up around 500 postdocs, and they also bring in 800 or so. The amount of population that each of the labs brings in is really scaled by the number of staff who are available to mentor them. And Bob Powell may have better numbers than me since he is an advisor to the National Lab Committee and works with all 3 labs. Bob, can you weigh in?
Sure. Just let me quickly introduce myself. So I'm a committee member, faculty member at UC Davis, going into my 37th year. And also I had the position that Mary had in 2012 and 2013, Faculty Representative Gouvain. So just really quickly, Craig, I mean, my understanding is, I'm not sure about UC Berkeley. My understanding is this year, Los Alamos had about half the number that they had last year. Last year, as you said, about 1,800. This year, I think on the order of 900. And the report that we had recently is that it went very, very well. I mean, it was all virtual, completely virtual, but it went very, very well. Lots of student enthusiasm. And as I understand it, with Livermore, it also was about half. So around 500 students this year, again, all virtual. And I believe in both cases, there's some hope of, if they can do it in person next year, they can bring some of these folks back and have them actually be in person, those who want to come back. So a lot of enthusiasm, and both on the part of the students and also on the part of the advisors. That's one thing that's quite striking at the labs, is the enthusiasm that the staff have for working with the students that come in all year long, but in the summer in particular, that you have a large student population.
Thanks, Bob.
Any other questions, Regent Mawako?
No other questions. Thank you, Chair Zell. I just want to thank everyone for your active engagement in undergraduate and graduate research. I think that's the strongest part about the University of California system, and keep up the good work. Thank you.
Thank you. Provost Brown, you had your hand up briefly. Is that a yes?
Well, when I saw the lack of comments, Chair Zettel, I thought I would weigh in. Dr. Moreland has a wonderful story that fits into this nature of conversation. And I'm wondering, Dr. Moreland, not to put you on the spot, but if you would really share about what mentorship in science has meant to you and how your own plans and activities reflect this conversation about mentoring and building and diversifying the pipeline of scientists.
Absolutely. I'd be happy to answer that question. Thank you. So when I grew up, I didn't really have anybody when I looked around as role models. I knew what I didn't want to do, and maybe that's a role model in a way. But coming to graduate school, my professor and advisor, Asmaret Berhe, is a huge advocate and works day in and day out to diversify the university. Both her and her husband are huge advocates for this. And you may have heard her on NPR recently talking about how to make a lab not racist. And so she's been pivotal in my experience as a role model of how to stand up with a big voice in big, scary situations and have gumption. And then at the lab, I've had two people, Roger Ains and my advisor there, Karis McFarland, who have shown me how to follow a mission and come up with what your mission here is on this planet, and to follow that and kind of with everything, to give up everything for that we really can, hopefully with some work-life balance. But through this experience, yeah, role models in every aspect of my life, of the type of person that I want to be, the type of work that I want to do, the instrumentation that I want to use, and really getting my own voice. So I can't say enough about the mentorship that I've received and how influential it's been in my life, because I really didn't have people to role model what being a scientist who's passionate about what she does looks like. And so, yeah, thank you for the question. I appreciate the time to think about that as well.
And may I follow on? Kimber, I think you held back a little bit. Can you just mention the instrument that you were trained on and you're now certified, the mass spec? That is not a trivial piece of equipment.
Yes, I don't know if you guys saw the picture. It's a huge instrument with so many dials and complicated things to try to navigate. And that's why it took over a day each week to learn and be trusted on this instrument, to not just run it, but to be able to take pieces off and put it back together. I'm the only woman that's been a certified operator on this instrument, which is really cool because I work with a lot of older men, so it means a lot to me for them to trust me in a wholehearted way on this instrument. And again, it's one of 14 in the US. There are some outside of the US, but it's very selected who gets to do this. And I think there's only around 6 or 7 people in the lab that are certified to operate this instrument. So I'm truly honored to have somebody train me on it and then to be able to pass this along. Thanks, Teresa.
That's an extraordinary accomplishment. And our last question goes to Hadi Makarishian, Regent Makarishian.
Thank you, Regent Zittal. I just have a curiosity question. You mentioned that so many of the students go to the labs. How do we choose those students, and are they able to come in from all the universities in the United States, or is it just restricted to University of California?
Yeah, thank you for that question, Regent Makarishian. Each of the labs has a student program. They advertise on their websites. Any student from anywhere in the world actually can apply to come to the labs. And then they share those resumes, as it were, CVs, with appropriate staff in the divisions and programs at each of the labs, and then they go through and interview those potential students, and then make selections and bring them in for these kinds of fellowships. It's a great program. It's a great pipeline for the laboratories. Those students that have a great experience at the labs go back to their campuses, and many of those are UC students. A large population at each of the labs come out of the UC campuses, go back and share their good experiences with their classmates. And so we think it's just a terrific program, both undergraduates, graduate students, and then as you saw with Kimber, graduate students turn into PhDs. Well done, Kimber. They turn into the potential for postdocs, and then ultimately either become staff at the laboratories or go to campuses or go to industry, but they become alumni to these programs, and then it just perpetuates. So we really think these are terrific programs. They've been in place for many years, and we bring lots of students in and give them great experiences at the labs.
Yeah, and then follow up on that one. When you choose somebody, is that a matter of affordability? In other words, it will cost for somebody to come to Los Alamos or whatever. How do they pay for it if they don't have the funds? In other words, when we talk about diversity and equity, I think if you can explain you have any programs like that.
Yeah. Thank you for the question. Yeah, absolutely. The students are paid when they come to the laboratory. I would have to check and see if we reimburse them for transportation and moving of households. That's a typical program that happens at the labs. And so the students are paid, and I gotta tell you, they're paid pretty darn well, whether they're undergraduates, graduate students, a whole lot better than my summer job when I was a summer person when I was working on my undergraduate. They pay way better than the construction company that I worked for at the time. So it gives them a chance to work in the area, to be mentored by people who are experts. And we work very hard across the laboratories to have as diverse a population as possible for folks that meet the academic requirements to be eligible to work at the labs.
Thank you.
If I may add to that, I moved from Merced to Livermore, and this paid a lot more than my TA-ship or the researcher position that I had before. And it actually enabled me to get a house here with a roommate and afford food and not have to worry about food or paying some of my bills or possibly having like a medical thing that came up. So I felt like a foundation financially in order to be able to be successful and not constantly worried about the stress. Not that I was saving a bunch of money or anything, but it certainly felt like a foundation to me in a very like high socioeconomic area.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, Dr. Moreland, for sharing your experience. To Vice President Maldonado, thank you for sponsoring this program and bringing it to us. And and Vice President Leisure, thank you very much. It's a great presentation. And if there are no other...
President Drake has a comment.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I did not see. President Drake.
Just a very quick comment, and very impressed, Kimber, with your progress to this point, the pathway you've taken and the promise for the future. And just to say that I think that soil sequestration of atmospheric carbon, I think, is one of the most important issues that we have facing us. So now that you've had this training, have you come back to the region sometime and actually lead a discussion on that very important topic? So I look forward to that in the future.
I'd be honored to. Thank you. I also feel that way. That's why I've dedicated my life to it. Thank you.
Thank you, President Drake. Any other questions or comments before we conclude? Thank you very, very much. We are
Thank you, Chair Zettel.
on to the next committee.
Thank you, Regent Zettel. I'm now going to move us to the Committee on Compliance and Audit for a quick item. Regent Elliott, you are recognized.
Thank you. I guess we'll call to order the Compliance and Audit Committee. A couple of quick items, I believe. First thing we need to do is approval of the minutes from the July 29th meeting.
Move approval.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Secretary, will you please call the roll?
Regent Anguiano?
Yeah, aye.
Anguiano, aye. Butler? Cohen? Elliott?
Aye.
Elliott, aye. Estolano?
Aye.
Estolano, aye. Malkarician?
Aye.
Malkarician, aye. Park?
Aye.
Park, aye. Perez?
Aye.
Perez, aye. Suarez?
Aye.
Suarez, aye. I'm just gonna circle back real quick. Regent Butler? Minutes are approved and you have a quorum.
Great, thank you. The one item we have before us in open session today is a proposed amendment to the internal audit charter. I know we have Alex and Matt here to talk briefly about it. This is an item that we foreshadowed in our last committee, so I hope folks have had a chance to look at it. Alex and Matt, if you want to speak briefly to this.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning or almost afternoon, everyone. At the request of Chair Elliott and Vice Chair Cohen, we had made proposed revisions to the internal audit charter to clarify internal audit's access to information within the system. Similarly, we have also added the requested escalation language to the charter to ensure any potential access issues are resolved quickly. Both Matt and I are able to walk through any of those or answer any questions that you may have.
Great, thank you. I think we do have a couple of questions or comments. Regent Park, did you want to speak?
I did. Thank you, Chair Elliott. So I wanted to know if there would be any objection from you, Alex, to further amend the proposed amendments to the charter. They my proposal would be on page 2, in the middle of the page, under independence and reporting structure, in the middle of that second paragraph that refers to the CCAO shall also consult with and advise the president on compliance and audit activities. If you would have any objection to adding the chair and vice chair of the Compliance and Audit Committee, you are a direct dual report to the board, and based on several of the recent events, it would seem to me that it would be a good common practice to do this with the chair and the vice chair, given that direct reporting relationship, and if it is already done, that we memorialize it through the charter.
Yes, thank you, Regent. I'm looking at the language right now, and I think I understand the edits that you're making. When I look at the first sentence, it appears that it memorializes that direct reporting relationship that you have communicated regarding the board and the Compliance and Audit Committee. But I don't see a problem in adding the language that you're proffering. I think the second sentence was kind of in addition to the consultation with the Board of Regents and the audit committee, that I should also consult with and advise the president on the compliance and audit functions. But I don't have any objection to that. That would just reflect kind of what we already do. I routinely meet with and discuss audit and compliance related matters with the chair and the vice chair of the audit committee, and also with the chair and the vice chair of the board.
Thank you. And so it was not just to memorialize the direct reporting relationship, which is already done. It is to memorialize the consultation and advisement process of your compliance and audit activities with the chair or the vice chair. So if you don't have any objection, I will make the motion at the appropriate time.
I have no objection at all.
Thank you.
Okay, and I think my experience has been that that's that is what currently does occur. But I do think if we're going to be making a change, that it is appropriate to have it formalized going forward. So I appreciate that. I guess a motion would be appropriate now to make that change. So we have a motion by Regent Park. Is there a second?
Second.
We have a second by Regent Perez. I'm going to quickly go to make sure there are additional questions. Regent Markaresian.
Thank you, Chair. I agree with Regent Park. That was one of my concerns. And my second concern was scope of work. I talked about this and it's reflected on the minutes of the last meeting, that we wanted to add the conflict of interest to this. And during the last meeting, and I was looking at the minutes and it's reflected, it was stated that each chancellor has their own guidelines, but that we would add our own guidelines to this scope of work, and it's not here. So I would suggest that we add the conflict of interest guidelines to this scope. If you look at page 6 of the minutes of our last meeting, my comments are reflected there.
Okay, I'm trying to pull up those comments, Hadi. Can you maybe help clarify exactly what you're seeking and that it's a change to the charter?
Okay. Okay, if you look at the page 6 of the minutes of the meeting, it says, Regent Markaresian asked about one of the audit recommendations, and President should create a system-wide CISO reporting structure sufficient to eliminate any actual potential conflicts resulting from the current reporting relationship with the system-wide CIO. And it was responded that this has not been created, but it will be created in the future. So that was part of the scope that was supposed to be added in here.
So I guess the question I have is what you're seeking a change in policy at Office of the President, or are you seeking a change in the actual charter, audit charter itself?
Well, it's part of the risk management, right? So, so on the scope of work, I think we should add the conflict of interest as part of the internal audit scope of work.
Chair Elliott, I might be able to address and help clarify things a little bit. The audit charter is basically the foundational document that allows us to get in and look at items on throughout the system for the benefit of the president and for the regents. I think Regent Markaresian, the conflict of interest that you alluded to during closed session was and is being addressed. It's just being addressed through mechanisms separate from this audit charter. This audit charter is solely for kind of access issues, underlying access issues for the internal audit committee and its ability to perform its job. But as to the specific issues that you were inquiring about regarding that role and the comments that you just made, that is being handled separately, and we are monitoring that implementation and will, as we've indicated, report any progress to the board. So it's a separate item, but we will ensure that you have that information.
Well, that's exactly my concern and question. Why are we addressing that separately and not in here?
This is, oh, I'm sorry.
No, I was saying that that's a very important issue, and that's one of the issues that we've been dealing with a number of times. So why is it not an important issue for the internal audit?
It's absolutely an important issue. This is just a foundational document talking about our access beyond the audit that we talked about in general, whenever internal audit performs its actions. What you were asking about, Regent Markaresian, is an operational issue. That is being reported to the audit committee on a separate track. It is being actively monitored. Any progress will be reported to the board. I believe we have a report that's going to be due in a month to both the chair and the vice chair regarding some of the progress. And we'll be talking to them on how to send that in from the board. It's a different animal than this. This document is for our audit work throughout the system, regardless the subject matter. And the information that you're asking was specifically regarding an action item, a management corrective action identified in closed session that we are following up with our own with our established protocols, and we'll make sure that we report the implementation to you.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you.
Excellent. Regent Perez, I know you had your mic up. I wasn't sure.
Well, I'd just like us to proceed now with a vote first on the amendment, then on the full item if we could.
Great. All right. There's a motion on the table and a second on the amendment by Regent Park. Secretary, please call the roll.
Okay, and
the first vote is on the amendment.
Correct.
Then the second vote will be on the full item as amended. If it passes.
Great. Okay, Anguiano.
Aye.
Aye. Anguiano, aye. Elliott.
Aye.
Elliott, aye. Estolano.
Aye.
Estolano, aye. Makarician.
Aye.
Makarician, aye. Park.
Aye.
Park, aye. Perez.
Aye.
Perez, aye. And Suarez.
Aye.
Suarez, aye. Amendment is approved.
Excellent. Thank you. Do we have a motion on the item? We have a motion by Regent Perez, second, I think, by Estolano. Let's call the roll, please.
Okay, Regent Anguiano.
Aye.
Anguiano, aye. Elliott.
Aye.
Elliott, aye. Estolano.
Aye.
Estolano, aye. Makarician.
Aye.
Makarician, aye. Park.
Aye.
Park, aye. Perez.
Aye.
Perez, aye. And Suarez.
Aye.
Suarez, aye. Item is approved as amended.
Excellent. That concludes all items before the Compliance and Audit Committee in open session, and we will adjourn. Thank you.
Thank you. So we have a couple of closed session committees to proceed with after a break. When we come back from the break, we will reconvene in closed session, first to deal with Compliance and Audit Committee, then Governance Committee closed session items. We anticipate completing those closed session items roughly at 2:15 p.m. And so folks who would like to join us again as we return to open session, we anticipate returning to open session at roughly 2:15 p.m. After a break, we will go into the closed sessions as I just discussed. Before we adjourn, the Secretary will now read the announcements about closed sessions, and then we will take a 30-minute break. Madam Secretary.
Okay, the Regents and its committees will meet later today and tomorrow in the following closed sessions. Compliance and Audit Committee to consider items C2X through C4X. Governance Committee to consider items G1X through G4X. Finance and Capital Strategies Committee to consider item F7X. And as a Board of Regents tomorrow to consider recommendations and discussions from today's closed sessions. All is duly noticed.
Wonderful. Let me actually adjust the timing. I think we will reconvene in open session closer to 2:30, given that we're a few minutes behind schedule right now. With that, we will take a 30-minute break, and in 30 minutes, we will reconvene at 12:22. We will reconvene in closed session first for the Committee on Compliance and Audit, and then on subsequent closed session items. With that, we will suspend the open session of the Regents meeting.